feels that the kind of the transition to a non-fossil economy is going too slow, right? We at Scania, we are trying to drive this within transport, but this is a movement that needs to happen throughout society, and it can't only happen from industry. We are pushing a lot, right? But it needs to happen also from kind of the regulatory perspective, and the rest of society needs to be there as well. So he tries to push this and get others to follow.
Yeah, and from Scania point of view, I mean, like the major topics is transportation ecosystem, but it's about automotive trucks, but ultimately electrification. And from this angle of sustainability, I think the main flag right now is on electrification as one of the key topics to get out of combustion engines and all that.
Yeah, I think we see that not only from kind of the transport, the companies, right, the OEMs that deliver now or presenting their kind of electrified roadmaps going ahead, but also what we see from kind of the societies, the countries, right? How do they invest in infrastructure and also hopefully then regulation to support this?
Yeah, and Sebastian, I mean, like, what is the mission of Vattenfall now? CO2-free generation in one generation, or what is it?
Yeah, it's actually fossil-free in one generation.
Fossil-free in one generation.
That's the claim, but also, the purpose.
That's the mission. That's the purpose of the company. And I think I saw the other day a super cool looking advertising on general television, highlighting a couple of the super innovative type projects that Vattenfall is working on in order to reduce carbon in the tough areas. Could you just tell us a little bit?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's not only about decarbonizing electricity, but also the adjacent industries. For example, fossil-free or carbon-free steel. For example, hybrid is, I think, the project name. Jet fuel, high skies, and we have those, let's say, lighthouse projects. It's not meant to be taken serious in that sense, but like to showcase what's possible, like a CO2-free produced dirt bike or some furniture, for example. I think it wasn't bad. And you can see them every now and then, just to showcase that it's not only about electricity, but about the whole industry, the whole basically life, society that we try to decarbonize in the end. And that's challenging, definitely.
Yeah. So, what was your take? I think, are we back on track and talking about the decarbonization and the Greta movement of the pandemic, or because it was quite strong and then it lost its voice a little bit at least, or quite a bit through the COVID. Are we back? Not yet. Maybe, I don't know.
Isn't that what we're seeing, right? We're trying to get back to that kind of the publicity of the movement.
Yeah.
Of really decarbonizing it, especially for us, and decarbonizing the transport system, but society as well. Right?
Yeah. Anyway, I think we will have a very awesome panel discussion here today. So let me start with introducing the guest, Georg, and you need to say your last name.
Georg von Zedtwitz-Liebenstein.
Yeah, and in the email is Zedtwitz. Are you going shorter and only on the full name, or?
Nah,
practicality.
It has to be a bit practical as well, even though I use the full name. Yeah.
Yeah, and you're from Scania.
I'm from Scania. That's
and
right.
We are all colleagues, so we know each other well. So that's super cool to have you here, Georg. And then I want to introduce Sebastian, and you need to tell me your surname properly as well.
Oh, that's simple. It's Kaus, K-A-U-S.
Kaus. So it was more for even I could do that one. Yeah. Exactly. And you're from Hamburg.
Yes, exactly. Working for Vattenfall, but in Hamburg, located in Hamburg.
Yeah, so you grew up in Hamburg?
Oh, that's a long story.
That's a long story.
Actually, I was born in Munich, but
But you're Hamburg.
Hamburg by heart.
Hamburg by heart now. Okay, cool. And then and we are having people now, distinguished guests from both Scania and Vattenfall here today, to have a major panel theme around AI for electrification. And I think there is a bigger cause here around sustainability and all that. And I think Gora used to tell me, be careful today, Henrik. Don't be too excited and talk too much, because this is truly a passion topic of mine. And the anecdote here is a little bit like I got hit really hard when I was working in Vattenfall on the fundamental transition into an ecosystem, like a traditional value chain from peak producing energy production plants and going into like the household energy. And now all of a sudden, this is all changing with renewables, with EVs, battery, solar panels. All this is fundamentally shifting the space of this. And then working with data and AI in Vattenfall, what hit me at that point in time is that, oh my God, if we're going to have an ecosystem, it is not only electrons that needs to flow seamlessly, it's the data and the algorithms to optimize all this. And then I come and start working with Scania. And we've been working for several years. And then all of a sudden I get hit by another ecosystem, the transport ecosystem. Yeah. And it's the same, right? But in a different industry. And all of a sudden when we start talking about electrification and electrical trucks, this kind of converges. and it's like two major ecosystems that actually have a lot of things that needs to flow as one.
Yeah, but that's what's so interesting, right? When you're talking about electrification, that it's not only a single sector anymore. There are so many more players here in play, right? That needs to work together.
Yeah, so this is what we're here to explore today. But I thought before we get into the meat and potatoes of the actual discussion, why don't you start, Georg, introducing yourself a little bit, like who you are, what you're working on, and what data and AI in electrification is for Scania, and your take on this panel topic.
Yeah, sure. No, so currently I'm managing data analytics within our Electrification Development department. So we are over a 700 people strong team that develops Scania's electrified products. And we started up very recently with the data analytics topics in terms of this team, at least. We've been working with data analytics for, I would say, a while. But now we're really trying to raise the bar across the organization. So that's what I'm tasked to do. And I've been within Scania for something around the past 7 years, something around that. And been working in the data space, but within different parts of Scania. So now this is research and development, but previously I've been at sales and marketing and closer to the connected services area that we have, and then also financial services where we met, Henrik.
Yeah, so let's see. In Scania speak, we're talking connect. Let's see, we're talking the truck. What is that called?
So development of the truck, you mean?
No, like the connected services. What is sales and what is product here?
Yeah, so connected services is really all about providing our customers, the transport companies, with digital services to make their lives and their business better than without them, basically.
Yeah, so this is very much data-driven services, you could argue.
Exactly, very
data
much
around
so.
the truck that optimizes fleet management or optimizes your total cost of ownership of a fleet of trucks.
For sure, and charging services nowadays.
Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah, and then in financial services, that's the loan and leasing and insurance angle of fleets of trucks or buses and stuff like that.
Exactly, where data is very much an important topic. Yeah. From I would say from a 360 view around that business. Yeah. Very much so. So then there I worked around kind of how to set up the ways of working around data analytics and how to support the needed kind of prerequisites to get there in this kind of very global organization.
Yeah. So and then of course with Scania. It's a global company, and it's about having manufacturing some places, having R&D some places, and then having market units in, I guess, 60 plus countries,
something like that. Yeah,
and we need data to flow in different ways from the head office, so to speak, all the way out globally.
Yeah, sure. From head office, but also I would say very much from our different business units around the world and back to head office as well. So there's a very data exchange in that sense. Yeah. But then also from our vehicles, of course, or I would say from our customers' vehicles, both kind of supporting them, but also supporting the product development to support our customers in the kind of the next stage to be able to understand how our customers drive, how they're using their vehicles, in order to be able to make kind of the best products for them. And that's really what we are doing within my organization, supporting the development of electrified products.
And now you're in a kind of, you're in a leadership position, but are you still a data scientist at heart, Georg?
I would say I'm very much of a data practitioner from a bunch of perspectives, I would say. But I think that's really, I think it's good for leadership to have kind of I think it's important to have an understanding of kind of the where it comes from, right? And understanding what's difficult. Because I've seen that before in other parts of the company where certain types of leadership haven't really understood what's challenging with data or what's challenging with software development in the cloud, for example. So I think that's a kind of a strength. On the other hand, I have a lot to learn, right? Yeah. So it's it's a super opportunity, really.
But I find it interesting that you have been in several facets of Scania in that sense. That's really, I think, helpful.
Yeah, very much so. And also I had the opportunity to work for 3 months in one of our portfolio companies from our venture business. A company called Sender. So
tell us a little bit, what is that all about? Is this like an innovation incubator that Scania is sort of having ownership in? What is it?
Yeah, so Scania basically has kind of a venture fund called Scania Growth Capital. So we invest in different types of companies, both startups, but also other types of the companies that we see as kind of beneficial. And what I did is kind of what we call a growth capital exchange, where we can go to one of the companies that we have invested in to both kind of bring Scania knowledge and experience into their business, get some outside-in perspective, but also to be able to learn, right? Sender is a digital freight forwarder. So they work within logistics. And what they're really doing, they're kind of connecting the transport need that kind of freight companies have, or not the freight companies really, but kind of these large Coca-Colas and Ikeas of the world, right? They need to transport a lot of goods, and then they can kind of connect that transport need towards transport companies, really. And they have kind of a digital platform to enable that.
Is Sender what we sometimes has referred to as aggregator type business in the transport ecosystem?
Yeah, I would say so. That they have a platform that kind of aggregates then a ton of different transport missions or transport opportunities, maybe, and using kind of data and analytics as well to kind of connect that to the right transport operator, to the right transport company that kind of carries out that load. So that was a really interesting, and it's a really good opportunity for me, at least, to kind of get a real insight into the logistics ecosystem. I've really been on the kind of the OEM side, even though I've been on connected services, seeing that side, but this is a bit something different. So I'm really happy for that, to be able to see logistics and in a much closer perspective.
And before I let Sebastian in here, the final intro question is like, what is your take on this sort of AI for electrification sort of panel discussion? What's the angle? How would you frame it? I tried to do it in my way. How would you do it?
No, what I think is really interesting with electrification in this sense is a little bit what I said before, but there are so many actors that now needs to collaborate. It's not only a transport company that can go whatever to fuel up and transport their goods, and they can now there's a totally different arena here. And if we look at transport planning, for example, that hasn't really changed that much in the last, I'm not sure, 50 years. I think it's really common that you still do it. Pen and paper maybe is on the way out, really, but Excel sheets or that's kind of the tool for transport planning. And now introduce electrification, electrified vehicles that are dependent on getting energy much more often than what you need with an internal combustion engine vehicle. But also you have to bring kind of influence of external factors like kind of wind and weather, and it's going to snow today. Is there someone else that want to charge at the same charging station that at the same time as me? Can I get access? All of these new questions. And I think that really demands for AI and for analytics and definitely for data to make that happen, really. I think it will be very difficult otherwise, or very suboptimal from a kind of society perspective.
Yeah, well said, well put. I want to let Sebastian come in here, and why don't you do your introduction of who you are and where you work and what you do and your take on this topic.
First of all, very exciting to listen to Georg, because I also have some ties to the automotive industry. I studied in Stuttgart, so Munich, Hamburg, Stuttgart, so I got around quite a bit, and still a lot of friends working there. Stuttgart is the car capital, if you want, of Germany. So, and I'm an engineer by heart. So my first, let's say, education is being an engineer. So it's very interesting what you're elaborating. But I was always in the, let's say, energy industry. First, I started up with a wind turbine manufacturer, but I was always in data basically all the time. And eventually, after being an analyst, I figured out it just takes too much effort to always basically do the groundwork. And eventually nowadays, I'm here in Vattenfall as information governance lead to structure the way of working with data, basically. So it's a bit abstract, but basically giving guidelines, rails, let's say, for the people who are working with data every day to do it more efficiently and to get more value from the massive amount of data. And it was really a development. So I was there myself in that swamp of data and basically felt lost. And I more or less tried to climb that mountain and to have a bit of an overview and a bit of a strategic approach to the problem that people can actually get value from the data with, let's say, a bit of a culture around it that helps them to make progress and to be efficient, come to that goal in the end, what we want to achieve with data, bringing value, bringing purpose for society in the end. And we have a lot of data, but it's treated awfully bad, I think, most of the times. So still a lot of work to do.
But it's this challenge, right? We've been dealing with data in our different business units for a long time. And we have probably been treating it okay and right for the original purpose it had. And now all of a sudden, we have all these secondary, tertiary purposes that becomes core that wasn't really on the agenda before. Much driven, I think, by ecosystem and interaction, interoperability now on a much grander scale. So I think that it is it's interesting when you're in Vattenfall. I think I'm very humble to understand the energy value chain, so to speak. I think we can even move there now, like with these kind of introductions. If you're going to have a meaningful discussion on data and AI in relation to these ecosystems, I think we need to set the scene a little bit to do some sort of exploration or definition of what constitutes the electricity ecosystem and what constitutes the transport ecosystem. And maybe we should try to have a go at the electricity ecosystem first, Sebastian. How do you, for someone who is not in energy, what are the big pieces here of the energy ecosystem, would you say?
I mean, for a lot of people, like energy comes out of the socket. So it's always there.
Yeah.
And well, that's it basically. What happens behind that is a mystery to a lot of people. It changed a bit in the last year because, well, of the situation we are in, maybe also in Germany especially. So more and more people understand how basically electricity prices are being created. I don't know, are basically appearing in the end on the bill. So the whole system is very complex in the end, from the generation of electricity to transporting electricity to actually basically consuming it at the right point. And the whole system needs to be in balance all the time. So it's a very fragile system as well. And we got a glimpse of it, how fragile it is last year, or well, still got a bit better, I believe. But yeah, it's definitely about keeping demand and supply in balance. And since we have more producers of electricity, different forms of producers. I mean, back then we had huge power plants. It was quite simple. They basically just pushed the energy into the grid, and there were more or less defined consumers, households, industry, and that's it. But today we have, for example, then electric cars that consume quite a bit all of a sudden, or not, or maybe feeding it back in, depending on the car. A lot of industries have electrified, so to say. So they are not only using fossil fuels, but more and more electric, basically energy. So the whole system got a lot more complex and a lot more players basically in that arena. And yeah, that requires change in terms of flexibility and more communication among those players in the end. And that's what we see right now.
Yeah, and if I have a go at summarizing what you said from my knowledge, you could understand the energy system a little bit by looking at how was Vattenfall organized a couple of years back or even today? So we had one business area, generation. So there's the production of energy, and they have a P&L starting with selling energy produced into the market. So here we have now generation. It can be nuclear, it can be fossil, it can be hydro, selling into market. And then actually we have another business area, which is trading, which is basically buying and selling and distributing from the market energy to different downstream players. So this is basically very much. This is very much as a trading business, and you can do physical trading on Nord Pool, or you can do financial trading on Nasdaq. And then now we have a new player with BA Wind, who has renewables and has a completely different business model. We have wind park or solar park or big farms, batteries, right? Where we basically now are once again a producer, but the core business model is about projects and getting the permits to set up an offshore farm, but ultimately selling. And then downstream, we have had the DSOs, the distribution service operator, the network, the grid, our network bill. And here we can now talk about high voltage, the major grids across the backbone of a country, to mid voltage, to low voltage, what we have at home. And then we have, and this now needs to be balanced. And then we have retail. So all this stuff, right, now we're starting to deconstruct actors that now needs to not work in a linear value chain, but into an ecosystem.
Yeah.
Wow. Sorry for being long. What about the transport ecosystem? If we take a stab at understanding the actors.
Yeah, the actors. I think there is kind of, if you look at it from a very fundamental point of view, I think there are two main actors, right? It's the companies that want to that has different types of freight to move around, right? And that can be both large corporations, like we said, the kind of the Coca-Colas and the IKEAs of the world, but also everything that's driven by kind of closer to consumers, right? And also parts like cities, right? We have waste management and all of that. So there's a ton of different actors that require transport in some sort. And then the other kind of logical actor is the transport companies, the companies that usually then owns the vehicles and employs the drivers and manage the entire transport then. Then we have, in between then, we have different types of companies. And we don't have to go through them in detail, but they can be some type of company that kind of connects the two actors, right? That makes sure that the one with the transport need finds a transport company to fulfill that need. And then we have, of course, the OEM that provides the vehicle, and that can kind of intersect into this in different ways, I would say, depending on kind of what business that OEM is working in.
And OEM is original equipment manufacturer, so this is the Scanias, the Mans, the Navistars.
Exactly, the vehicle kind of manufacturers. That's right.
And would it be fair to say that if you went back 30 years, the identity of Scania, we are a truck manufacturer, and we are proud. We are the world-class building of internal combustion engines, and so we were very much focused on the product, OEM business model, and maybe that's also the segue in here how this is sort of getting more and more blurred as well here.
Exactly. There's a lot more. I would say there's a lot more focus on supporting the customer across their entire business, right? So it's not only supplying a single product, their truck, and then we're just stepping back and enjoy it, be happy, come back when you need a new one, but instead kind of being together with the customer for the entire life cycle of their business, not only the truck, of course, but their business. And traditionally, this has been kind of the service business, making sure their vehicles are getting the right care over time, right? But of course now, and I think this is where electrification really kind of kicks in, right? And where it becomes really interesting, because with electrification, it's not really enough to only sell a vehicle and just add some service afterwards, right? To be able to really manage an electrified vehicle and have business with it, it requires so much more. You need charging, right? And you need to kind of connect that into your transport planning, and all of that kind of connects. So that's really kind of course, where Scania is heading as well, right? Charging services, for example, but also other players in this ecosystem that we need to collaborate and partner up with.
But can we zoom in on the intersect between electrification in the OEM, transport, and the energy ecosystem. What are the key intersects here? If we can use, I think you were on it right now.
Yeah, I guess charging is one of the most kind of obvious intersects, right? We need energy at some point in time at some place, right? And then the energy needs to be there, and we need to be able to consume it and so on, right? That's
and the other angle on the same topic. In that case, we need to be able to service that energy, and we need to be able to balance and optimize the grids for in relation to a demand that is fluctuating with the fleet of vehicles, as an example.
Yeah, absolutely. Also, we need to communicate a lot better. Like if we know that tomorrow a lot of trucks need charging, but there is no wind or no sun or whatever, then we need to somehow accommodate that need. Either, I don't know, have some batteries in the back, or I don't know, hydrogen solutions in the end. That, let's say, forecasting also becomes very important in the end for us as producer of electricity to then provide the energy at the right time. So it's not only about, again, plugging in your charger in the socket, but knowing that something is coming. Maybe also when there is too much wind, that maybe then it's, smart to charge your trucks already, maybe before schedule, and then basically leverage from that energy that's there. And that requires a lot more communication, or in other words, data in the end, to provide that information. So there's definitely a large intersection here.
And could we try to describe that intersection? What is the data AI dimension here? I mean, so we are saying we want to anticipate, we want to forecast, we want to understand what is happening in order to plan and optimize many different things, from transport to having the right electricity available. And we are talking about a chain of actors now that ultimately, as a system, needs to work to optimize the whole as well as optimize the one. Or can you
and just to kind of to have the energy there, right? I think that's a very it sounds like that it's very fundamental that if we're going to have the capacity in the grid at the right point in time, then we need to do this. And what I think is interesting here, I see this from kind of two different perspectives. That I see that we could probably kind of solve this just by having data available in the right way at the right point in time to the right persons, right? But that seems almost unreasonable to make it happen, right? And then we come into the analytics part. Can I predict when trucks will be at a certain point in time, at a certain place, so we can kind of forecast the energy need there? But in my mind, at least, that could probably be planned away, because usually you know when a transport will happen sometime at least ahead of when it actually happens, right? Usually some transports are planned in very long advance, days or weeks even, when a transport will be run and which routes that truck will take. And then sometimes it's shorter in advance.
So if we move into the more detailed data and AI angle, what you're saying, Georg, is that in order to manage this, one of the key aspects is to, ahead of time, being able to plan or anticipate where and how different needs will arise. The need for electrons, the need for transportation and all that. And this is, now we're getting into the analytical algorithm space. How can we predict different things, or how can we see this as a whole?
Yeah, exactly. I guess in a very perfect world, that data would be fully transparent and available to everyone who needed it, and then we maybe wouldn't need the kind of the analytics side so much, right? Because then you would know that which routes all vehicles would take, since we have planned it in advance, and we know which charging stops are on that route, and when certain vehicles will be there, then sure, of course, kind of traffic happens, and there will be rescheduling and everything like that. But can we get to that level of data transparency in this ecosystem? I think that's the question.
Yeah, I mean, if everybody had the data, that doesn't need, it doesn't mean that everybody also can use it in a purposeful way. So that's maybe also where AI can support in the end to get a bit of meaning into the data when you're maybe not even the domain expert, but you have close enough experience on what that could mean in the end. So having the data at hand is good, but not sufficient. So we need some sort of domain knowledge field into AI, so to say, or intelligence at all, and then maybe even leave it to the machine to do the job, that people can actually benefit from the data. Because just sharing data is not sufficient. It's almost meaningless in the end if you can put some purpose behind the data.
But can we dissect this a little bit? Can we exemplify what type of concrete data or algorithm type problems are we talking about here? So if you're talking about planning, you have the one hand side, the traveling salesman trying to optimize road planning and all that. Yeah. Can we elaborate on a couple of different types of what is it that we're talking about concretely in terms of what type of data needs to be shared, or what type of algorithms we can potentially understand that this is all about?
No, but I think kind of the planning part is really a good example, right? Because it's all about kind of where will trucks be at what point in time, and to my mind the question is who should sit on that information and who should do the optimization. That's far from obvious for me. Should every transport company do this themselves? I have hard troubles kind of seeing that we will really get a kind of a benefit for the greater good or for everyone if that would happen. Okay, so what other player will the transport companies kind of share that data to in order for us to achieve this, where their trucks will be? And it's and then you get in kind of privacy things and stuff as well, but that's just complicating. But who should take that role as the optimizer of the system?
So we are talking about the optimizing of the one single problem versus the optimization of the system as a whole.
Yeah, exactly. Because it's not, even if you would kind of the typical approach, I would say, to kind of transport planning or fleet management is that you optimize for a single vehicle, right? You want to have the best route possible for during given traffic conditions or whatever. But now we're talking about that maybe not energy needs to be available where you need to charge. So that's maybe outside of that single scope for a single vehicle. So we need to take in not just a fleet of a single company, probably the kind of the rolling fleet in an entire country, or even wider. Kind of Europe is very kind of tightly integrated. If you look at transport, it happens very kind of between countries and between regions. So it's not enough to just look at a single company or even a single country, probably.
And theoretically, this data exists, right? If we elaborate a little bit, take Scania as an example, who has had connected vehicles longer than most.
Yeah.
What type of data are we talking about that you get from a vehicle today?
Yeah, so usually if you're a fleet management provider, right? Even if it's Scania or if it's someone else, you sit on the kind of the information on where vehicles are at a certain point in time.
So you can actually track it on a map, and you can see all your vehicles based on
exactly. The customer or the transport company, they can track their vehicles. They can see where they are on their map. They can probably do route planning. They can do a bunch of stuff, but it's usually kind of configured down to their single vehicle or their single fleet. That's usually what it happens. And usually, kind of from my perspective at least, what you don't have is information about what they're transporting, where they're going and why. And I think that's this crucial information in order to really optimize this. It's not really enough to know where a single vehicle is and kind of maybe where it's going, but you need to have kind of the transport perspective as well. Okay, where is it going? Is it shuffling that transport out to someone else at some point in time?
And that other parts of data exist somewhere else, with the Speditor or with the DHL or with IKEA
or the freight forwarder or whatever,
or the freight forwarder.
Yeah, exactly.
So it's not that it doesn't exist. It exists, but that's another problem where someone is trying to optimize when should I get my load, for what purpose, at what dock.
Yeah, exactly. And that can go into this kind of optimization route as well, because it gets quickly very complicated, right? It's easier if you think I have a set of transport missions I want to do, and then I can plan and we can optimize in some way. But in order to, but that's not usually always the case. You can also think strategically when you're choosing which transport missions to do, right? I can take a transport mission that fits kind of my planning or the optimization in a good way, and not just having a super long list of transport missions that I have kind of committed to. But we could think of that. But I can take, as a transport company, I can choose this one because my truck is already there, and in 3 days I have to do this other transport, and it fits with taking this transport mission, and that kind of fits in well with the optimization of that specific company. So there are multiple actors here with different type of information, and here we need some kind of transparency into this to make this work. And then you add on top of this what we talked a little bit about before, that a lot of transport companies are not super digital, right? They're still, even if they're having kind of digital tools in one way, even if it's Excel or something else, or even some app, right? But their processes is usually quite manual and non-digitized, which kind of means that connecting and sharing information is really difficult. It's a challenge, really. It's not like, I'm not sure which other sector to compare it to, but it's quite of a challenge, actually.
Perhaps I can try to compare it to another sector. That sounds really far-fetched, but I think actually it's more closely connected than you think, and that's the music industry. Mm-hmm. So what happens when music becomes digital? The Spotifys of the world, got into market. You have the normal record labels. They worked very much in Excel sheets, just as transport companies, I guess, do today. But suddenly, the distributor of music, in this case, takes a much larger role. It, for one, not only distributes CDs anymore, it actually distributes digital information and music, but also provides recommendations suddenly. And suddenly also provides services to the creator. In this case, it could be the manufacturer of cars, or in the music case, it's the creator of music, the artists. And they take over almost some of the roles that record labels have more and more, with the exceptional marketing potential. But otherwise, a lot of the services that were provided by record labels is then integrated into another provider. Do you think the same type of integration will happen in the transport industry as well? That perhaps Scania and or transport companies will take a bigger role connecting both the creation of transport or the manufacturing with the service of actually providing the best route planning or whatnot?
Yeah, I think so. And what I'm interested to hear from that perspective is also if we kind of seen that these companies that provide music, have the kind of the type of companies shifted? Because what I see is that, or my question really is that the usual kind of Scania customer is a kind of a family-owned business. They have a few trucks, right? They're kind of a small company. And then you have kind of the really big transport companies with thousands of vehicles. And when if you say like, we're going to digitize transport, it's going to be more expensive. Electrified vehicles are a lot more expensive than combustion engine vehicles, of course. Batteries and everything. Will the small companies be able to do the shift, or will there be kind of bigger players that will take over and
concentration into big players potentially?
Has that happened within music?
I think it's the opposite, actually.
Yeah. Okay.
Both in. Yes. How do you mean?
Well, before, if you were to publish an album, which was the traditional way of publishing music, you had to have a lot of money to produce it to start with.
Right.
Today, you don't. You also had to have a lot of people to do the, editing, mastering of that music. Today, you don't. You had to have a lot of money to do the distribution of CDs and whatnot. Today, you don't. So it means that more single players, creator of music, can actually do more themselves, but with the help of another big player. And perhaps, if you think about industry and you have, the higher costs of actually performing or, buying a truck, perhaps instead you have a more subscription, the sharing economy kind of solution, which is what the music industry took, which is what I guess the whole taxi industry is also taken with Uber and whatnot, and perhaps trucks will take the same route at some point. I guess that might happen, but that would require some player, I guess, to really be able to really digitize the kind of the transport company's business operation, basically, because that's what we're talking about. Yeah, but if you take the Uber example, you really have enabled a lot of small players to come in to become taxi drivers. Wouldn't that be possible also for truck drivers then?
Yeah, probably. And I think that we have seen that, right, for transport as well. I guess you have Uber Freight in the USA, but it hasn't really worked the same way. I can't explain kind of all the factors into this, but you had Uber Freight coming to Europe, and it really didn't kick off in the same way as it did in America. And there are probably a ton of reasons why, but the transport industry look a little bit different here than it does in America. And the question is, how will that kind of business environment or the kind of the transport ecosystem here in Europe kind of go towards what we're discussing here?
But if I rephrase or try to internalize what you said, Anders, is in the music industry, you had a value chain and a certain set of actors and some barriers to entry that looked in a one way in the past. And then it became a platform play for a very few quite large plays, like Spotify could be the example here, that took another completely different role. But when they did that, it refactors the kind of value chain in the other end. So what was driven as a value chain with the big labels in one way became very low barriers to entry on the one hand side, but extreme barriers to compete on the platform play. So maybe this is, so the learning here could be that whatever we think we know about how the value chain and how the actors look like in the transport ecosystem, that's going to be disrupted. Is that fair assumption, I guess? We don't know yet, but,
no, we don't know,
but there's a major platform place for some, and there's maybe a completely opportunity for smaller players in another angle of this.
No, exactly. I think the only thing we can be sure of it will change in some way, I guess. And you can take this even further when you kind of think about autonomous vehicles, for example. They will be even more expensive and require even more digital infrastructure.
And I will add that to the list. I think that's an awesome topic to speak more about. You know, what happened when we had more automated driving and automated trucks. I think that's a very interesting topic. But just thinking about, what are the potential disruptions that will happen in transport industry, if we just, finish that topic a bit, and if it will be some kind of disruption, saying some big players, perhaps Scania, perhaps they will do, if we had Mattias Lindahl here, who is a professor in circular economy, he claims that all companies should stop producing products and start selling services. And perhaps selling functions, as he would call them. And the function then would be, I want to transport this, freight from this point to the other. And that is truly what a company like Scania would sell potentially in the future instead of a product. And that would incentivize, in his view, from a more sustainable society point of view, that they need to minimize the cost for producing these kind of products, the vehicles. Also maximize the lifespan of the vehicles and minimize the cost and the carbon emission and everything. Because if you sell the whole package function instead of just the product, you will need to optimize for the whole function. Do you think that's the path that Scania will take?
I can say exactly what will happen in the future, of course, but I think the arguments that you're putting out here, I think they seem reasonable. And
the arguments you're highlighting in various formats, we have seen them at Scania, yes. Yeah. So we are, no one knows, but if you want to think about it, yes, and maybe me and you before has a little bit deeper insight into this coming from the financial side of Scania. Because if you think carefully about it, when you have expensive assets that you want to translate into functions as a service, you need an underlying financial instrument. Someone needs to have the asset on their balance sheet. And the core question, what happens now is that in the past, we have sold a lot of loans where actually the vehicle is on the balance sheet of the actual mom and pop or the big Coca-Colas. Whilst when you do it as a service, as a function, the asset, the super expensive autonomous electric truck remains on the balance sheet of the service provider. So I guess trying to understand and wrap our head around what that means is something that me and Georg and our crew has been thinking about. What does this mean? I mean, like you have much more funding muscle in a very different way. So, but never forget, if the asset is heavy in the end, if you want to provide a function, you need to figure out who is owning the asset. I mean, like Uber's gone a different route here. Yeah. Uber's gone a different route.
I mean, going back to the music industry earlier, when we take that as a comparison, that's pretty much the same that could potentially happen there. That we had this physical CD or whatever carrying that product that was expensive to produce, to distribute, to whatever, and then it became a service via the internet. And it's maybe also something that we haven't touched yet on that particular case. Did the music industry change? Did the taxi industry change? Or did they use a certain technology that was available, that was maybe even standardized to a certain degree and easy to adapt to scale the business in a way that hasn't been possible before? So I think that's maybe the actual change that we see there. It was easy for the music industry because there was MP3 at one point, there was HTML, so they could hook on that.
It's an exaggeration, but yeah.
And then basically they could build up the business. There was and they were sort of in the right moment in time, and they had the opportunity to do it, and then also basically make that shift. Yeah. Scania or maybe even Vattenfall, they haven't been in such a position or a situation where they could make use of the internet in that sense, so to say. But I think there is something very similar going to happen if those companies would equally make use of that opportunity.
Yeah.
Data, transferring data, communicating via maybe standards. I mean, MP3 is nothing else but a standard to, encode your music.
But it's a very deep philosophical question here as well. When Daniel Ek started Spotify, did he look at himself as a software company, or did he look at himself as a data company? I think you've said it before, Anders. He sort of framed himself as we are a software company in music or something like this.
I think the phrase was, probably paraphrasing, that we are tech at mind with music in our heart.
Oh, tech at mind, music at our heart.
That's a nice quote.
But now extrapolate on that and try to understand where Scania needs to be in to succeed here. So they are truly a engineering truck manufacturing company at heart from the legacy and the proud history. And all of a sudden, to succeed in this play, you kind of need to say tech in our mind and trucking or transport in our hearts, right?
Yeah, probably more transport than
transport, even more than exactly, right. Yeah. So that is a major shift, right? So he's starting up a company which has an identity as a tech company with music in his heart. Here we have an engineering proud. We have the world's best and most ICE, internal combustion engine, made us, And now we're going to be a Spotify of transport. It's an interesting one, right?
Yeah, really, yeah.
But can we in the same way now we sort of elaborated and looked at the disruption of transport. Let's do a similar journey around electrification. And I kind of want to start this journey, if you can help me, around the grid. Because I think a lot of the challenges here will be around how we distribute and optimize the grid. And maybe if I can frame it like this, I will take a shot. We have high voltage, the backbone, the big things, how we transport energy long distances. We have medium voltage around our metro areas that goes into low voltage. And one of the key problems, if you're the transmission service operator, so here we're not, the DSO is the distributor in Vattenfall, and then you have in each country a transmission service operator. In Swedish, the TSO is Svenska Kraftnät. Now they have a challenge, to balance the grid. So the real challenge, as I understand it, is that we want an even voltage at all times. Like if you're in heavy industry and produce steels, volatile energy is really bad for high quality steel, and at home equally bad, right? And so this becomes the problem that before we were on sort of balancing and forecasting on a daily basis, and then we went to an hourly basis, and now we are moving into near real time, 15 minute and near real time, and the whole thing is connected. What's the spot price? What is happening in relation to all this? Do we have too much energy in the grid or too little? So this becomes a real balancing and flexibility problem, and sort of the crunch, the punchline, the problem with all this is that the way our grids are working today, this is my understanding, the utilization rate of our grids, like all the electricity produced, out of that 100%, how much can we actually use effectively? And that is less than 50%. So there's a huge flexibility, balancing, optimization problem, or it's a huge infrastructure investment problem to be completely with overcapacity. And just to make things even more hard, as long as we had nuclear or fossil, we had a stable supply. With renewables, it's much more volatile. When is the sun out and when is the... So there are many dimensions here that sort of impacts volatility. And to me, this is a huge headache in relation then to electrification. I don't know, that's a long rant from me, but this is my kind of knowledge I try to summarize.
What's the question?
Yeah, I'm trying to...
Maybe I need to...
no, good. So
correct.
So this is my understanding,
yeah.
and now is my understanding correct? Can we go deeper and understand this problem or other angles of it?
I think it's not so much about the capacity, so that 50% utilization or whatever. I mean, it's fluctuating, and yeah, we have fluctuating production nowadays, various reasons, but also fluctuating consumers, also larger consumers that haven't been there before, cars, but also I don't know, heavy industry that use electricity today instead of fossil fuel in the end. Also, it's not going like top down, high voltage down to low voltage, but it's also like, look at the solar panels on houses nowadays. That's on the, let's say, lowest voltage level, but then pushing up energy basically to the high voltage level.
And us grids are not built for...
That's the point, exactly. So, like if you look at a small village with very thin power lines, so to say, and all of a sudden there is a farmer with a huge barn, and they just throw solar power on the or solar panels on the barn, that needs to be consumed, and that is unlikely at the small farm, like relatively small farm, but that needs to be transported eventually to the high voltage level or grid in the end, and that needs change and adaptation basically. Or you have a truck coming by and picking some of the energy up in the end. But that is exactly the change that we see here, and the complexity. When I was listening to Georg on how complex the trucking world, the transportation world looks like, it's equally complex on the electricity side. So it's a high dimensional problem that we try to solve here. And it gets even more complicated because there are so many dimensions that you need to take into account into your optimization algorithm, or even the task to optimize it is, I think a human will not be able to even incorporate all the effects that are occurring in that situation. So it's...
but that is another angle. Before we had a few big assets. And now if you understand all the different assets that makes up the electricity, it's literally in the millions when you have EVs and you have battery walls and all that. Yeah. So what could before be done in Excel in relation to all your assets, because they were finite, it's almost an infinite number of complexities in terms of optimizing now what constitute assets that are part of an energy grid or connected to an energy grid.
I mean, it's definitely the solar panels, for example, is one prime example, but also wind turbines. I mean, they're getting larger now. The wind parks get really big, like actual like traditional power plants, and they have usually one or two connections to the grid, and they are also acting in a way like traditional power plants. So they're so huge, and they're usually built in areas where it's relatively stable when it comes to the wind resource, fluctuating here and there, of course, but it's almost like normal power plants. The challenge is really the solar power, I would say, or smaller, let's say, flexible heat pump, whatever solutions that also consume a lot of energy, and integrating them into the grid is, maybe the more challenging part in the end. The wind, I would say, is not so, from a stability of the grid point of view, the challenging part. Also in the future, we try to use the wind turbines to produce hydrogen, to also just have them basically running 24/7 or longer when there is, for example, too much wind. And we have that especially also in Germany, but also in other countries, when there is so much wind that, and the grid is, let's say, not built enough or like strong enough to transport all the electricity or to consume all the electricity, the wind turbines are used to create hydrogen or produce hydrogen in the end, which can be stored, which can even be pushed into traditional, let's say, gas pipelines and so on, and somewhat stored, which is a problem with electricity, which you usually cannot store that well.
So in this whole situation, we talk about the grid, but it needs to be mentioned also that the whole storage problem, because it's also about storing at the right place in the low voltage or mid voltage where it's needed. So it's not one type of storage we're talking about here.
No, you can have, of course, your battery in your like, perfect example, your solar panels again, and you have a little battery pack in your basement. You can store it there and then be more or less almost independent in your, let's say, house. We have hydropower, also where you can pump up basically water and then let it down when it's needed. That is, of course, bigger. And then, of course, hydrogen, if the energy is anyway there and you can just convert it, then why not do it? Then you also don't need to care so much about the efficiency of that conversion, because it's pretty much free anyway to create that hydrogen. And you can store it indefinitely, basically, like in human scale, basically.
Could we try to just summarize a bit here and perhaps frame it as some kind of question? In short, trying to understand the energy grid problem for transportation in something. That would be a fair
nice
question. And then we have the supplier side, and we have an awesome representative for that. And we have a demand side, someone that wants to use a lot of energy as well. But then if we focus on the supply side, what are the major changes happening recently, especially thinking about the move to more non-fossil kind of power sources? And I think you mentioned a lot of them, the solar energy, wind energy, and the problems they have. You have hydropower, which I guess is really nice because it's very stable and you can use it to control the frequency in the grid, etc., in a really nice way, right?
Definitely. Everything that you can sort of control in a planned way helps to balance the grid, definitely.
So how would you summarize, the problems that we're seeing now to try to have an awesome energy grid from a supply side? Is it that we have a much more volatile kind of production of energy now coming to non-fossil fuels?
It's definitely a challenge because it's so different to what we used to have, which is a very stable, almost like years ahead planned system where you can always tell, well, that nuclear power plant or coal plant needs to go into revision in 5 years, so that will be gone in 5 years, and you can really time it. That will not be the case for the future when we have more renewables in the grid, basically. But it doesn't necessarily mean it's a problem because, the granularity of the basically planning becomes smaller, more detailed, but you can still anticipate. And with the distribution of the generation, it also means you don't need to transport maybe energy over longer distances because they can be consumed at place of production in the end. So it's difficult, again, to predict the future, but the system changes, but there's also a chance to use it in our advantage in the end.
But that's one part of the problem. When we bring in more renewables, it's a different way of planning for production. I think the other side of the problem is the explosion of users, so to speak. So the demand side and the fluctuality of demands and what happens where electric vehicles that is moving and potentially can connect anywhere in the grid. That's another side of the demand. So
but can we just finish the supply side before we move into the demand?
It is the supply side in relation to having the supply at the right place.
Okay, it's also not so clearly distinguishable in the future, because also, and that's the idea to stabilize the whole system a bit, because when your truck can also serve as a producer in one point, maybe there is no goods to be transported.
So can we summarize like this? I mean, for one, you have the volatile problem, saying the cost will go up and down in time in a very fast pace, and you need as a demand or as a consumer of energy to minimize that cost in some way. But it's also potentially a localization problem then. Is that what you're saying?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not only the costs and the time when, I mean, it's really where as well.
And the volatility becomes a cost problem, but originally it's a voltage volatility problem. In the electron that is flowing, we want a stable flow of electrons, that we don't want volatility. So I give you an example. In Australia right now, people are coming and they're building solar panel as crazy. And the business case is, of course, that you can sell back to the grid. I have friends working with this problem. And all of a sudden now, there are 600 households sold last year who are not allowed to connect to the grid because the grid cannot take it's overcapacity. It's major failure for anyone who's trying to do that investment, and they need to fix it super fast. And this is all boiling down to balancing a stable volatility at the right level of our grids. And then the impact of this becomes huge spikes in cost and prices of the energy market. When we don't have enough energy, we need to buy it from Germany, or we are exporting our energy into Germany or to Central Europe, and all of a sudden our prices in Sweden go up. So it's both the technical electrons volatility problem, but ultimately then also a pricing problem, of course. Is that fair? Summary?
Yeah, I would say so. Yeah, I mean, more aspects maybe, but those are the major ones. Yeah.
And then the localization problem, that's exactly right. Do you have a supply problem that it's where you need to optimize where you supply, and if it's high voltage supply, if it's middle voltage supply or low voltage supply. And typically, the more you can balance the grid locally, that you are taking energy from your neighbor instead of having more high voltage pushed into your local grid at home, the better.
Okay, so we have a volatility affecting both the ability to push stuff into the grid, I guess, and also that affecting the cost, I guess, in the end. In Sweden, I guess we have the option to actually control the frequency rather well with the hydropower that we have, and perhaps
that's
Australia does not have that ability. But then we have a locality as well. But then you spoke about a number of power sources that we have, like solar, wind, nuclear, coal, or whatnot. Do you have any thoughts about what we are missing potentially, and if you were to guide some politicians in how are we going to stabilize and minimize and make or optimize rather the energy grid from a supplier side? Should we put more money into nuclear and these kind of small modular reactors or whatnot, or what's your best advice?
Oh, if I had the answer, I wouldn't be sitting here. I wouldn't even.
You would be rich. You would be the president, or you'd be rich.
Yeah, no, it's
perhaps cold fusion would be the answer.
Yeah, of course, free energy, nice, almost free in that sense. No, I think it's a mix, really. It's not the one source of production that you can just use and throw at the problem and say, oh, now we have solved it. It's the smart mix. It's being flexible, and it's also a bit on also the demand side, to be honest. So we always talk about, we need to replace all the electricity, and nuclear power plant goes off the grid, then we need to replace that. I think a large portion of the task can also be realized by having the consumption a bit more under control. And at least in Hamburg, we have...
What do you mean with that? Do you mean the consumption say that we want this specific type of power, or?
No, just maybe use less, or use electricity in a smarter way.
At better times?
Better times, exactly. when it's available, when it's cheaply available. Of course, not at the extent of having a reduced comfort in life. So nobody's wanting like getting up at 2 a.m. to do the dishes or whatever, because then it's cheap and you can get your water heated up. But certain savings, I think, can be realized on the demand side that help basically not replacing the capacity on the production side so much.
But that's more AI analytics on the demand side could help the supply side in providing energy.
Or more energy storage, right?
Or storage, exactly.
Local storage.
There is another aspect of this, and this is storage. I think local storage in the right format for the local and to the mid. I think this is another key area that sometimes we're talking about, we need to produce so many more wind farms or like this. Some of that investment should really go into researching and optimizing and figuring out the storage problem.
So what are the different storage options? I know Elon Musk is putting a lot of battery parks out there. Is that the way forward, or is it hydrogen, or what's your best guess?
I mean, we talk about electricity.
It's a mix again.
It's an ultimate answer. It's a mix.
Yes.
I mean, we talk only about electricity, but again, we can convert electricity and heat. I mean, there's always losses, but if we have an abundance of, let's say, primary energy, which we have,
renewables,
that conversion is, well, in the end, it's also about the cost of energy. So eventually it gets expensive, of course, but that's to be sorted out. So it's, batteries, of course, but I don't think they will be the sole solution for the problem, because there's not enough batteries, and most likely will not be to provide a stable grid as we know it today. So of course hydropower, but that is limited. At least in Germany, that's pretty much, there is nothing else you can do. Maybe Sweden, there is some opportunity here, and Norway, for example. I mean, there are new power lines being built between Scandinavia and Central Europe to leverage from that possibility to, for example, then push energy from the offshore wind farms in the North Sea to Norwegian hydropower plants and so on. It's definitely mixed, but then of course hydrogen. I think right now it's really.
How much is available in terms of hydrogen in Sweden? Do we store energy in hydrogen today in Sweden?
In Germany we do. I'm not sure in Sweden actually.
I'm not sure as well. But it's minimal nowadays. Yeah. So that needs to be built up. The whole industry needs to be built up basically.
But isn't there a lot of ways to convert electricity to hydrogen? Or what's the energy?
The main and most simple way is that you have direct current and just put it in water.
I remember Elon Musk speaking about this once. He spoke about hydrogen cars, and he said it's the stupidest idea I'd ever heard about.
Yeah, exactly, because the carrying hydrogen is not so easy, and storing it in small amounts is not so simple, so to say. And then distribution, and it's
But also I think he spoke about the conversion as well, that you lose so much if you actually produce electricity, if that's the way of production.
It's not an efficient process, but again, if the availability of electricity is abundant, then why would I care if it's 30 or 35? So
it's better than at least wasting it.
This is the point. It's actually used today in situations where the wind farm is not allowed to connect more energy back to the grid, and the alternative is to waste it. And then, we have an inefficient way, but at least we get some out of it. But I think there's another way of understanding storage, and that is to start dissecting the types of bottlenecks in the energy system. And then you have one type of bottleneck at home. That's probably gonna be batteries. And then you have a type of bottleneck in your local area smart grid. And then you have another type of bottleneck between medium voltage and low voltage. And then you have a third type of bottleneck between high voltage. And then you have a fourth type of problem exporting from the Swedish energy market and energy system via cables to another energy system in Central Europe. So the answer to what type of storage is relevant, I would argue, depends very much where is the bottleneck and what type of bottleneck are we talking about. And then batteries has a clear place in this story. There are other examples. I think Germany is quite good at this. In the Netherlands, in Vattenfall has tried. We really heat up a bunch of water, like district heating, and working very smart, converting energy to heat. And then you can convert heat back to electricity. So there are other ways of doing that. Yeah. But it really depends where is the bottleneck.
And in the end, it's technologically everything is possible. I mean, we can do crazy stuff, but can we afford it in the end? That's also at some point that we need to put into the equation that
it makes sense.
Then the kilowatt hour, 200 SEK, I don't know. So that might not be a viable solution, although it might be technically possible.
Cool. Can we just, before we continue to other topics, also finish up the demand side of the energy grid problem? And then, there is a lot of things happening on the demand side, of course, when moving from fossil fuel trucks to non-fossil fuel electrified trucks. You mentioned a number of them. You need to charge more often, etc. Can you just, explain a bit? What's the difference between combustion engine trucks versus electrified trucks in terms of charging?
Yeah, exactly. No, I think there are a couple of key elements that make that really kind of differentiates them, right? And I think that it's the usual stuff, right? That fossil fuel engine, kind of storing energy in fossil is very efficient in that way, and the kind of the energy to weight ratio is really, really good in comparison to what we have in batteries at the moment when we look at the kind of the current technology, right? And what does it mean, right? Yeah, we need to charge more often than we need to fuel.
Charge in terms of refueling, not in charge of money.
No, exactly. That's a good clarification, right? So we need to charge energy, add energy to the kind of the onboard storage to the batteries more often than we need to fuel the kind of the current fossil fuel vehicles.
That means, I guess, that you have to plan more efficiently how the trucks are driving and the routes that they're taking.
Exactly, and maybe you need to charge in other places than you used to fuel up. But it could also be that you have some new opportunities into this. Because usually maybe you don't have a fueling station where you want it, right? But electricity is a bit more accessible, I guess, than getting fuel in some way. Right. So I guess depot charging, as charging overnight at the transporters. Facilities, right, that you can do, and that kind of gives some new opportunities and kind of having your vehicles fully charged after a night of rest in that sense and ready for work. Yes.
So the whole infrastructure, how and when you want to fuel up the truck is vastly different. Is one way of summarizing it. So if you have an electric vehicle, you realize the difference between overnight charging versus in transit charging and all that.
Yeah, exactly. And I think if you have an electric car, that kind of makes it even more clear, because depending on your driving patterns, right? But if you only make kind of shorter distances, so you can always make it back home, right? Then you never have to go charge or you refuel somewhere, because it's always up there because you charge it at home. And so it changes a little bit, kind of the behavior of how companies need to think about this.
And in trucking speak, now we are talking about what is the demand problem in long haulage versus what is the charging problem in local area light trucks, metropolitan transport.
Yeah, exactly. And that's because the range issue we all talk about, that it's not enough range because batteries are not good enough. But that's not true for kind of all applications out there. There are plenty of applications, for example, certain in intercity applications that can charge overnight home at the depot and do their kind of the route for the day and go home and charge again.
I heard someone saying, instead of charging, you simply replace the batteries and leave them there, and then Do you think that's an option is that something that Scania is looking into?
Yeah, it hasn't really kicked off here in Europe, I would say. I know that battery swapping, as we call it, right? It's a much bigger thing in China, for example. There they really have kind of ecosystem of battery swapping with standards and things, so you can actually go to stations and get your battery swapped, which has not really happened in Europe yet. I would imagine that multiple actors are looking into this, but I'm not sure. I haven't really seen it in reality yet, in happening in Europe at least.
I've maybe something that I've seen at least on some parts of the autobahn in Germany, that they have overhead lines. It's testing basically.
Oh, really?
So it's basically a truck with looks like a train partly, at least from the roof up. And then of course where you can have like distinct parts of the highway where you have those installed, and then the trucks can basically line up and then drive at a certain speed, still making basically progress on the way. Still driving, charging up, maybe also very efficient, I don't know. That could also be an option. But yeah, I think it's very much between, is it local distribution of goods? Or maybe we even, and that's maybe not a nice thing for Scania in that case, but maybe we put also some trucks on the, or like what has been transported by trucks on the train. Mm-hmm. Maybe that's also part of that solution. And then Scania focuses more on that local distribution and not the 2 days straight driving.
But there's I think that there's also kind of a data perspective and an AI perspective on top of this, because if you look how we kind of done, we talked about transport planning before, right? It has been looking the same in a lot of time, but now we have different prerequisites, right? We have analytics and AI have really skyrocketed in the last couple of years, so we now have the kind of the toolbox we need in order to do transport planning a lot better. Which means that maybe we don't have to drive as far as before. Maybe we can do something smarter. Maybe we can reshuffle goods in another way than we have done before. Instead of just putting it into one truck, driving for a super long time, and then from point A to point B. Maybe we can do something else. Maybe we can use AI or optimization to plan this in a better way, where we can drive shorter distances, maybe. And then reshuffle the goods, and we can optimize it in a different way.
That's surprisingly interesting, I must say.
Yeah.
But it's fun, it's like this kind of first principle thinking here, what can we really do when we have this kind of situation where perhaps we don't have as, far reaching range, but then, you come up with new solutions and they perhaps even improve.
Exactly.
And this is one of my goosebumps moment, and I'm not kidding, because I think to solve transportation and electricity is a first principle data AI problem. Mm-hmm. In my gut, I sense that all the data and how, if we rethink how this is done, there are other ways potentially that takes eliminates problems that doesn't need to exist. But if we are locked into the analog or the process the way it's looked like for 50 years or 100 years, we can't see it. So I'm sensing exactly this, Anders.
Cool.
But I would like to explore a little bit both your, what you're working on now as another way to, dissect this angle a little bit more concretely. And I'll start with you, Sebastian. So you're working a lot with data governance and how we can make data interoperable, so to speak, and use data. So if we start exploring, what you are working on in Vattenfall, and if you would like to extrapolate key things around data governance or data sharing and data interoperability that you see sort of you're working on now, and around the corner you should be working on a hell of a lot more based on the whole context that we are doing now. What would that be?
It's what we're discussing here between more or less like a producer and the consumer is what I do also in Vattenfall let's say in that regard, smaller scale. So, we also have, as we discussed at the beginning, producers, the trading business is huge. It's insanely complex because it's not only electricity as a good, but also prices, availability, and so on. And then, of course, all that, let's say, customer market that we have not, partly touched, but again, heat pumps, charging, you name it. And just within Vattenfall, that is already a huge challenge to make those people talk to each other in a more unified language, so to say, so that we, at least in Vattenfall, already start understanding that whatever is happening at the production might have an impact at the trading, might have an impact at the consumers, at the, let's say, custom and solution area that we have that are selling the electricity to our end customers, also like not B2B but B2C customers, and that alone is a lifetime of work, it feels. And just having common definitions, that's where it starts. So when we talk about certain, like what is a customer even? So that the prime example of the data governance challenge, so to say, having 5 people in the room and 6 opinions about it, and then somehow come to a solution, and making people talk to each other. I think that's the key element of the governance in the end, is helping people to talk to each other in a meaningful way.
And then the data to talk to each other.
Effectively, and also the data, that the people don't need to talk so much anymore, because that's the transition you want to make happening. So it's today a lot of alignment meetings and, oh, what do you mean? And do you have something for me? Whatever. Once that is clarified and standardized, pretty much like that, music example from earlier on, when the ecosystem is set and we know what the opposite means, the data can talk to each other, and then things can be scaled, and then we become productive.
And what Sebastian is talking about here is absolutely profound, and maybe it's used to put a perspective on how difficult and why this is in a place like Vattenfall. It's very. If you understand Vattenfall, it's not one company. It's actually several companies with very distinct operating and business models. So the generation business has its own P&L, and it stops and makes its profit when it's selling the energy. And then the trading is a different one. So in the past, if you go back 50 years, before we even understood the energy transition, it was simply a company of 5 distinct businesses that had a loosely coupled, value chain. So there is no legacy that these things is an interoperable ecosystem. It didn't work like that. So therefore, it is really changing in the root of Vattenfall, that these things now, oh my God, we need to have the same lingo from generation to the customer. Who the hell came up with that idea? That's crazy.
But that's a direct result of the change in the electricity market, because there is flexibility.
This is the result. It's not we didn't come up with it. It's just where it's heading.
If the system was as stable as before, and it was just like some consumers, and I could plan 5 years ahead, and I could just send a letter that would arrive 3 weeks later. Oh, in 5 years I need whatever amount of energy. Then perfectly fine, but the world has changed, and that's why we also need to change. And
this is the challenge and the opportunity, because if Vattenfall or companies like Vattenfall can crack this nut, vastly different business models need to interact in an ecosystem internally in Vattenfall. You're on a very good path to understand the full ecosystem problem. So it's very interesting.
It's a nice place to be, but it's also challenging. But there is a huge opportunity to leverage from that situation. And we shouldn't lean back and basically let others do the job, because we can do it. It's just, challenging. And we need to have a lot of stamina, so to say, to get there. But
so this is the data interoperability in this angle. If I move to you, Georg, what are the type of use cases and analytics that you are working on from an electrification point of view? How does your portfolio look like in data and AI right now, when you're early in, so to speak?
Yeah, right now it's quite selective, I would say. We, starting off as a new team, we have kind of always been on this balance of how much should we kind of open the floodgates in terms of new use cases together with the organization, in towards the kind of our current capacity, because it's been very small. We started off in September. We spent a lot of time recruiting, and we're getting there, but it takes time, right? So I always try to find this balance, because I said that when I started out in September that we stand before quite an interesting challenge, right? Because when you have kind of 700 people that feel that great, now we have an analytics team, that is the perfect storm for disappointment. Especially when you're 2 people starting out and you're going to build up the team, and it takes time. So that's the kind of that's where we're coming from, right? But as I see it, we have kind of tried to focus in a few different areas to make sure that we can kind of reuse what we do, so we can scale that in properly. And I think one thing is just establishing this kind of base plate, this fundamental follow-up things. Because I think if you're a development organization of any kind, really, doesn't matter if you're developing a component, a hardware component, or if it's a system or a function that the driver will use or whatever, right? There's still this view of following that up. And it's really kind of the essence is that we need to do it much earlier than we have done before and to a much larger extent. Previously when we have internal combustion engine vehicles, it's been, obviously, we've been quite successful doing this for 130 years. It's obviously been quite enough to know the customer and get the great product out there. And when things break, we get to know, we have processes to get that right. But when we get into electrification, that's not really enough anymore, because we don't want to just get feedback when stuff breaks or doesn't work. We want to get feedback when the customer we thought we were designing the product for isn't really the customer that was buying the product or a specific component, or that the customer operation that we designed something for isn't really the same kind of operation that the customer actually had in the end. We need to close that feedback loop so we can learn really early in the life cycle of our individual components or systems or functions or whatever we're developing within the scope of an electrified product. So that's kind of what we're trying to achieve. And then I think it's a good way to kind of start with some fundamental things for these teams, so they can just get insights from data into their daily lives in a simple way. So they can kind of start having those simple discussions, because that will feed it becoming more and more advanced over time. And yeah. So
one of the key areas to focus on in the beginning of this lifetime is to recognize that you are right now a development organization, and you are developing electrification products, and therefore what data and analytics do we need to enable and speed up the development process as such of the core product?
Yeah, exactly. Because the company has really recognized that this development process isn't linear, right? It's really a circular process, and there are many loops into this. And the question is, how do we get the right information to loop back and the right insights from our customer? So that's kind of one perspective, of course. But then you have kind of just looking at kind of the complexity of these systems that are a part of electrified vehicles. Batteries, I think, is a great example, right? Because you didn't really need to understand in such granularity how your fuel tanks would age. If they would, I'm not sure, if they would rust, it would be quite easy to fix, right? But if batteries age poorly, that's a big problem. Not only it's expensive, and it affects the customer directly. So understanding battery aging, for example, is a super important topic for any vehicle manufacturer that produces electrified vehicles. And how do you do that? There are multiple ways, but data is, of course, a super important part of that.
So could you say simply that an electrified truck is a much more complex system, and it's very hard to manually, in some Excel sheet, understand how the truck will work and how to use it properly, and therefore you need to use data to truly understand what the best way to, for one, have the full management of the whole life cycle of the truck, but also how to operate it and find the routes and whatnot.
Yeah, exactly. Because my team's scope is really supporting kind of the development of electrified vehicles, but then we have other teams.
Development like manufacturing, or what do you mean?
Like designing the components, the systems, the internal parts.
Manufacturing, right?
Yeah, you could say that. But I see manufacturing as kind of actually producing the vehicle.
Okay, after you decide it.
Engineering versus production.
Exactly. We support the engineering. That would be. But there, as you said, there are so many more parts in the life cycle of the vehicle. So we have other analytics teams across the company that works with these, supporting sales, for example. It's to sell on electrified vehicles. There are some more considerations you have to do as a customer in order to understand kind of where to charge, how will that work for me, my operation. So we have analytics teams working.
Would you say that the future of Scania trucks is more of a software product than a hardware product?
Yeah, I would say so. But and from many perspectives, I would say not only from the kind of the internals of a vehicle, right? Yeah, the hardware is of course super important, and will be differentiating in some way. But I think software has never been more crucial to a vehicle than when it comes to electrified vehicles. But because before, you need to have okay software in the vehicle, right? But if you don't have great software and services around electrified vehicles, it won't work at all. Exactly. Because you need to charge and you need to kind of get that into your business. So then you need data and software.
Interesting.
Please take one more.
I'm trying to close the topic here. It was a bit hard.
But I have one because I have a lot of friends from Stuttgart and they also deal with electric cars a lot. So I think the challenges are a bit similar. I mean, I think the truck itself becomes less complex in total because that internal combustion engine is insanely complex, but in future it's just an electric motor with voltage and current basically going in and then creating torque and
so less
RPMs.
Complicated from a mechanical point of view.
Exactly, yeah. But all of a sudden you have the opportunity to monitor that whole system a bit better because it's like the stuff that happens is simpler, but you can monitor it better. Yeah. And what you also can do, for example, is, and I know that you can, let's say, run an update on your truck, which has all of a sudden completely different characteristics. So it could be having more torque because your engine, let's say, configuration changes, which you can hardly do on an internal combustion engine because that's more or less set. But you can, let's say, control an electric motor completely different. And all of a sudden you can, basically cater to that need. And then, you have some software that you need to do it for you.
So if I understand it correctly, since it becomes easier in terms of mechanics because it's fewer moving parts in an electrified engine, but then you have more software that allows you to control it in a more flexible way.
That's my assumption. I mean, that's what I know from discussions with them. I would assume it's the same with trucks. And then, it becomes much more a software product in the end where you say, I need to have that new software update before I can do that long haul run or whatever, because now the whatever is optimized.
But and as an electric car owner, I can concur to this when I select to buy a new car. Before I could look at what is luxury, what is premium, and I really want a Mercedes-Benz from Stuttgart, of course. And then someone said like this, you know what? Is it luxury to have a Mercedes-Benz, which is a beautiful car, and then standing in the middle of Sweden in minus 20 degrees in your Italian loafers and fiddling with trying to charge the car? So the joke here is, of course, Tesla, as an example now, has looked at the end-to-end experience, the whole vertical experience around the car, and maybe there are more plastic inside the car, but it's damn more luxurious when I can go up and just put my charging thing in the car, and I don't need to think because in the background I have software sorting things out. So another way of looking at this is that with the mechanical engine, and you could focus on the frame of the car, and that was your scope, and you could maximize this. Now, this part of the equation has been simpler in some ways, but the experience now is broader. You need the end-to-end experience to work. So it's simpler here, but the overall is more complex, and the overall then is much more software intense, I would argue. Is that a fair? And this is my experience with owning an electric car. That what constitutes luxury or experience is now way broader than outside the car. And by the way, I love my car as long as I can charge it at home and I have no problems. But I hate my car when I need to go a long distance because my car is good at this, but not so good at that. As an example.
But it's kind of funny what you said around the that kind of I can get more torque or whatever, right? And because it's not. Introducing features to your vehicle that you previously got when you bought the vehicle, but now you have to kind of subscribe to or whatever. I think it's not so easy, right? I heard that BMW introduced that you got heated car seats for a subscription. So you have to pay monthly for getting heated seats.
So it's all there, but you need to pay.
Exactly. I think the criticism have been said, right? It's
you just want to hack the car, so you just enable it.
So if you're a software, now we need to all be hackers so we can sort out the car. Time is flying. I want to move into a new segment, and I think we have now explored, the challenges, the how important this topic is, and I would like to get us into a little bit of solution mode. And the hypothesis when we frame this panel is that in order to really succeed, to become successful in this new world of ecosystems, electricity, transport, and to some degree this intersect, it's a multifaceted problem. So I'd like to introduce that we do some sort of speed topics so we can, I think the angle here is that in order to fully understand the problem, you need to touch and get a grip of several multifaceted angles. And the argument is you can be fantastic in the first angle that we talk about, but if you fail on the other ones, you will not succeed. So that's what a little bit like, instead of going super deep rabbit hole on one of them, let's try to compartmentalize so we can touch 7 topics in maybe half an hour in total. This is going to be challenging, especially for me. but so I'm zooming out and I'm going into solution mode, and I'm now going to put a topic to dissect for a capped 5 minutes or something like that. And the first topic I want to start with, if we start with the actual algorithms. So what will become the fundamental issues with algorithms and models in an ecosystem? And do we see one all-encompassing perfect algorithm AI, or do we see many small algorithms, and how will we optimize for the one single purpose versus the systemic problem? So, what's the issue with the algorithms, and what can we see a direction which is more relevant? And please, Anders, what's the algorithmic direction here?
I didn't follow your question, so please you can go ahead and see if you can answer it.
My take on that is that it won't be just one; it will be many, and they again need to talk to each other somehow. So the input and output needs to be somewhat defined. The first thing that really comes to my mind here is who's defining them, who is documenting them in the end, and are actually then delivering what they're promising, and how do we check that? So we can, especially when we talk about advanced algorithms, machine learning, whatever, AI in general speak, most of them are sort of black boxes in the end, and you cannot really explain sometimes why they came to that decision. And that could be a problem in that sense that we maybe want to have some traceability. Why, if it failed, we have a huge blackout. I don't know. And that will be challenging to figure out and to control it, especially if it's about such fundamental stuff like electricity that everybody relies on. You don't want to have, an accident. Like if you are sitting in northern Sweden and your car is basically flat and you can't charge that's your personal problem. In that situation, it's sad enough, but the country basically in a blackout is not what we want. So getting that under control is definitely a challenge. So
robustness and security, transparency, exactly. Super important topics. You said something before, I think it's a good angle into the algorithm problem. Who's going to optimize the whole?
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. And to me, it's a lot more about the actors here than actually what the algorithms will be or who will not be, because who will be in a position to actually apply algorithms to optimize the transport system and the energy system then for that sake as well, right? Who will be that grand player? Will there be one? Will there be many? Probably not one. But
let's now dream. How could it work if we have not one single? Let's go fully decentralized. There's not one single like let's go blockchain. Yeah. There's not one central guarantor, so to speak, but it's a fully distributed approach. How would that work?
It's a really good question, and it's funny that you mentioned blockchain because
that was a joke because he hates blockchain. Yeah. I was actually having fun.
No, but I think it's funny because I usually think about blockchain that is it really the technology that's the problem or the enabler here? Really, it's something around how we work and how we, because usually it's not a problem that we can that we can store data in a safe place and we can trust each other. We do this all the time. AWS, for example, they're kind of a platform, right? We trust them with our data. We don't need a blockchain for that.
But can we just move this discussion a bit more concrete? I think, for the listener as well, it would be really nice if you just exemplify this into some specific problem. Either it's like optimizing the grid or, finding the best routes for transportation or something. Can you find a single example that you can speak about to simply connect to this question about, what are the right ways to design whatever algorithm we have? Do you have a preferred question?
Maybe another example from Germany last year or last winter, I don't know. We had actually quite some discussions. If we run out of gas and we need to shut, which is basically the effect that we're fearing that there is no electricity.
Yeah.
Who do we shut down first? Do we charge the trucks?
Yeah.
Do we?
So balancing the grid or something. Okay. So speaking in some way about the question about how to design algorithms for balancing the grid or something. Could that be?
Yeah, exactly. What is the desired outcome as a society? Do we agree that some consumers have a higher priority? Do we shut down some producers earlier because, I don't know? And who's deciding on that in the end? Is it a private company? Is it a group of people? Is it a group of companies? That's something that I think should be solved or discussed in applying those algorithms in the end. So I have not an answer, but I would like to have that discussion at some point.
Okay, let's take the example of transport ecosystem, and let's try to dissect that, because on the one hand side we are optimizing different parts, but here you go into the example of optimizing the whole.
Yeah, exactly. And then the question, what is the whole? But I think if you look at freight forwarders, for example, they're the ones that kind of connect the ones with the transport need to the transport capacity. I think they're in a really good place to optimize, right? They're not optimizing, they could, for a single vehicle or for a single company fleet, but they could do something on a higher scale. And connecting that then with kind of partners around energy, for example, that they can be in a good position to do that. And that would require then kind of algorithms to optimize this in a good way that would then benefit the kind of the totality of the system, but the same way kind of making those transports happen. Because somewhere there is a trust relationship here that when you sign up for it, then you commit to a transport mission, right? It needs to get there. We can't say, but it was best for the system that those transport didn't make it. Or maybe that should happen, but it's a difficult question.
Maybe open sourcing them is a must.
How about this? Let's go. Can we go a bit philosophical already? Perhaps?
Yeah, please.
And just thinking about it, we have some kind of transport system. They want to move. Okay. Now I want to find, like a futuristic kind of scenario where we have suppliers of energy and consumers, and they want to move a package from point A to B. Now, they want to in some way do some trading on, I want to buy this energy during this time, and I want to find a way to move this package, perhaps by reshuffling, as you said, in finding that. But then it means you have to have some system where they talk to each other, perhaps in an automated way, saying, I have this package to deliver, who can give me the best offer to move it? And then someone automatically replies. Perhaps this is, if you think about the ad business, and then you have ads on Google search or in Bing or in nowadays also ChatGPT, if you haven't seen it, there is like a broker market where you can say, I want to have this ad placed and I am willing to pay this much, and someone offers like a deal. Okay, you can see it here at this position. Could that be a future for transportation as well, where you basically have a broker market or some kind of marketplace where I want to move this package, someone is offering, you can buy this energy at this place, or I don't know.
Yeah, sure. I think that's happening already, right?
Exactly.
There are kind of these transport markets that have a ton of transport missions out on them, and you can then bid on them to win them.
Okay, there is a bidding market.
Yes, there is a bidding market already, or multiple of such marketplaces.
Oh, I didn't know this.
Yeah.
And the argument could be here that they are doing it from with a view of maybe a part of this whole problem, but potentially they need to be more encompassing and you can bid on and you can match in more dimensions like electricity as well.
Exactly. And I also think you have to kind of consider the different types of kind of transport agreements, right? Because it's kind of a lot of transport happen over long-term contracts, so long-term agreements. Say, I want to transport one truckload every week, this date for 2 years, and you kind of agree to that. But then you have what's called spot loads, which is more you have under capacity, for example. You run some special project that you need to have more loads outside of your kind of managed contracts.
It's even called it's like spot market for electricity.
Exactly.
Right?
It's very much the same.
It's spot loads. Spot loads.
Spot loads and spot price. What's it called in
spot price on the spot market? Every 15 minutes, you say, we need some more energy, and then whoever.
Yeah,
this is actually very interesting.
This is why
marketplace is both in transport and
this is why I'm so fascinated.
Systems there, but they don't talk to each other
between
right
these
now.
industries, and it's so fascinating.
Okay, so you have their own marketplace, for energy, and a second one for transport. And today they're not connected, but perhaps in the future that they could be.
Maybe that is a factor that could be incorporated into the transport business. And maybe the other way around, because when we know there is like a huge fleet of trucks that need to be charged, there is a consumer where we say, we know next week on Monday morning, they all fire up their engines and charge the batteries, whatever. And then, you have a price for that.
But let me throw in a curveball here. So we are trying to understand the algorithm solutions and problems that we need to look into. Now we need to, if we are arguing that it's not one, it's many small algorithms that need to work together. Do we need ideas and thinkings in the direction of federated machine learning or privacy-preserving machine learning? Do we need to have ideas how we can do models on the whole while preserving privacy of the models of the different actors? So is federative machine learning or something in that line, is that a core part of the future here? Do we need something like is this kind of thinking needed?
Yeah, because if you're going to develop these algorithms, that I guess the further up in the ecosystem or in the hierarchy you go, like the more important that perspective becomes. Because if you're very far, if you're down there in the bottom, you're looking at a single vehicle or a single transport company, that's less of a problem. But if you want to train your algorithms on the entire transport market or whatever, that's another thing. And that's, I think that perspective really becomes important.
So federative machine learning is when we're starting to talk about different ideas for, you can say this better, Anders, very distributed or decentralized. I'm not sure if it's a distinction here.
It's a difference, yes. But
so are we talking about a decentralized approach?
Decentralized.
Yeah. What is, because a decentralized approach means different actors, and we are not allowed to see exactly what, the data of all of the different actors. But for the ecosystem to work, someone needs to work on the model as a whole. And now we're talking decentralized machine learning architectures. Is that fair? As an angle that most likely needs to be pursued to solve this?
I think it's more about some sort of common standards behind that, because I cannot really imagine all different players, Scania and you name it, get together in one room and basically agree every single line of code with each other to have that gigantic algorithm, but rather have common ways to adhere to, and then they are developing their independent solutions in the end.
All right, now we're going somewhere, because what you're now talking about is that even if we have within our own things, we have our models and we do our things, we need very standardized protocols, APIs, or standardization for how things are interacting.
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty much like also Europe works, like the European Union in that sense. We have a lot of different countries, local legislations, stuff is allowed in Sweden that you cannot do in Germany and vice versa, but at some level, we are agreeing on certain standards, laws, rules, and that's how it works. And
can we learn anything here from the telco industry? How the telco industry had many different protocols, and now we moved into LTE and 5G, and we have very sharp standards. We can do roaming, stuff like that. So I can seamlessly move across the world and my phone works. You know, is there something like this that is obviously needed? It's like some of those protocol standards.
I would say so.
Could I throw in another topic?
Yes, we are trying to do the short list. I'm trying to go through a couple of topics, but please.
And this is partly from Goran as well. But if you think from the transportation industry point of view, talking to the energy sector here potentially, what would be your biggest wish that they would do to fulfill the needs of the transport industry and Scania in coming 5 years?
Wow, that's a good question. I think there are so many answers, I guess, and I guess the most important answer is, you know, having the right capacity, the grid capacity at the right place. But then I see, if we go further than that, I would say, if we can provide some insights into demand, can we get a good price and ensure
having the data available?
Yeah, exactly. If we can tell where vehicles will be at some point in time with some degree of certainty, can we get a good price or ensure capacity to be there? I think that's would be from kind of the transport perspective.
Awesome.
But if I take it back now and we move in, so we have started with the algorithms, and I think in a nice way, Sebastian segued us into another key topic to explore to make this work. And this will be some sort of main heading, governance and standards. And I think you could argue if it's super decentralized or many different actors in the ecosystem, this is some sort of federal setup or something like that. So could we elaborate a little bit about, that we can kind of touch that to work on this governance and standards, finding the bodies like they have in telco, like standardization bodies or something like that. What do we see here, both in the transport and the electricity ecosystem?
Yeah, I think that they're kind of two different perspectives. Either we go towards the route that you're saying, that we agree on some common standards and we can exchange information kind of effortlessly and we can make this work in that way, or there will be some kind of a few really big platform players that will go in and set this there. I'm thinking around the kind of how cloud works today, for example. Everyone is not running their own data center anymore, and the kind of loaning capacity to each other when we need extra. That's not how it works. We have Amazon and we have Microsoft. They have everything, and then they set the standards, and we are happily just agreeing because they fulfill our needs. Couldn't that be a scenario for?
So you're highlighting two core scenarios. Either there's some mega players who like by force. And used sort of
and not only force but also by
convenience,
exactly.
By convenience or by force or by superior service. We used to come to it and we do it that way. Yeah. So this is one core scenario. The other one is a decentralized scenario where we have no real super players like that, like no tech giant, and then we come to a need for standardization or something like that.
I think that's the more realistic scenario, to be honest, because, Google, whatever private companies, Vattenfall is a state-owned company of Sweden, 100%. And if there was some Germany coming around the corner and now telling technically the Swedish state how things work now, not sure if that will work out in the desired way, and vice versa as well. So I think a scenario like we have with the European Union, where it's also sort of a federal system in the end, where people come together, maybe not in the parliament style, but somewhat close, discussing basically that agreement and saying, well, this is how we should communicate with each other across borders, across systems, whatever. And that is a realistic scenario.
I was talking at Enlit, the European Utility Week, the major utility conference or DSO conference in Frankfurt. And then I saw a panel discussion, and we had Mr. Fabio Veronese, head of digital CIO for the Enel DSO, which are sort of super big when it comes to distribution network. And then they had a fun question. It was, if you were king for a day, what would you proclaim or what would you do? And he said it quite interestingly enough, if, and he did it very theatrical, so he did it well. Like, if I was king for a day, I would dictate what protocols we use. So he was into your idea on a very computational level, that we need to sort out what protocols and what APIs and how should we fundamentally have interoperability as a core. Instead of going into every detail, how should things talk to each other?
Exactly, yeah. And we don't need the king for that. I mean, we have parliaments and they work surprisingly well. So.
But they don't really work on this level of granularity.
Maybe they're not aware that it's necessary, right? I mean, maybe they were distracted somehow. I'm sure if that was more present, the need for that, then they would talk to each other and come to that alignment. It's a wish right now, of course, but yeah, you can express wishes.
Cool. Let's leave this speed topic and let's move to the next one. So if we have not gone into data governance, we have gone a little bit into algorithms. Can we understand something about the architectural patterns? Because I see we are now going down a route of decentralization heavily, modularization, so are we now talking about the huge monolithic platforms? Are we talking about a very decentralized type technology architecture where no one can own anything, but we all need to have, in quotation mark, microservices across the all different actors that needs to interoperate? Is that what we're seeing?
Yeah, that's a good question, and I think that depends a little bit to kind of the scenario here, and kind of the would kind of the more extreme scenario be in terms of having a distributed setup that every transport company, they make their APIs available, so others can kind of share or consume their information for this optimization to happen, or will there be other players like freight forward, for example, that will sit on this infrastructure? Then I'm pretty sure it won't be a monolithic system just from the kind of the software engineering and DevOps perspective, right? To make this work in the kind of the longer perspective. But I think we're somewhere that I think we need to kind of be in a little bit larger actor that can then have the kind of the needed resources to actually deploy these types of systems, and I'm pretty sure they won't be monolithic. But
can't we learn from the fintech industry? I mean, like, we have the big banks and look at some ways, and now they're eaten away by a lot of different small players, very niche, very good at something around banking and fintech, or I mean, you have Klarna, right? So as a fairly big company that is sort of working on their sets of services with extreme API thinking, and where you basically use their service in the back end and stuff like that. Why wouldn't that kind of logic apply here?
So what would it mean in transport, right? Would it be different actors providing different types of services then to so for example, we have kind of charging services getting the energy, we have kind of the planning services, different ones,
yes,
and they all have their own kind of APIs that then connect together in some kind of way then.
Yeah, so we have a microservices idea on steroids. Yeah. And everybody's building their microservices for their product or service offering. But ultimately, they're all super interoperable and with a very cool standard protocol, how you get the data or how you get the algorithms to flow across it. And then it's up to you to, in the mesh of services, pick out what will work for your particular case and optimize for your case. And ultimately, someone will then pick out and optimize the whole thing.
Yeah, exactly. But I think if you take the analogy with kind of with the payments and the fintech and how kind of buying consumer products work on the internet, right? You have Klarna, and if you look specifically on Sweden, I guess I don't know how it works outside of Sweden, but
they're a major player.
Yeah, I know, but still, Klarna is. If you would look at most of the kind of the pages or the stores where you buy stuff, Klarna is almost there on every page, right? So they're kind of a big player that really dissected the entire ecosystem in that way.
They started small, and then eventually they got to the big player storyline that you are referring to.
Yeah, exactly.
Organically.
Yeah, exactly. So what I'm saying is that maybe we need such a player for some of the things, and then others can kind of connect to that. different delivery options. For example, we have Klarna, they're kind of the backbone. We have payments, right? But then we have different delivery services and different other kind of stores and services using Klarna. So it's a different type of ecosystem. It's not totally distributed. Everyone has the equal weight, right?
No.
There are some different weights in terms of companies and services.
This is a good point, that even if we see this as an ecosystem, most likely there will be bigger players, smaller players interacting as actors and finding their niche. Sometimes it's broader, sometimes they're sitting on an aggregator niche.
Exactly.
Or they're sitting on that is...
Yeah.
But yeah.
Two thoughts on that. I mean, also Klarna is then depending on those standards that are existing in the banking industry. So that's fundamental to have. Again, basically making a point back to governance. But also, I think it's inherently necessary to have such a system because it offers security and redundancy. So if something breaks somewhere, imagine if Klarna wasn't there anymore tomorrow, there would be maybe PayPal or, I don't know, in Swish. I don't know if that's possible to use.
Go with the Klarna route. They will soon take over everything.
It's good to have multiple players for such fundamental, like payment is fundamental, transporting good is fundamental. So we need to have redundancy in that system.
Could we add another topic that we had on the backlist that we haven't been able to touch yet?
Sneak it in.
And I'm not sure if it's going to be quick, but we could try. Okay. How will autonomous driving influence the transport sector?
Wow. That small little topic.
That's not
in 30 seconds.
In 30 seconds.
No, please.
No, it will make a big change, I guess. It will. I think as electrification kind of fundamentally changes some dynamics. And
if we take that, if you compare autonomous driving versus electrification, which one will have the biggest impact on the transport industry?
That's a tough one.
It's a tough one. I think autonomous actually, because I think that electrification, even if it's kind of shift a little bit some fundamental principles and how we can do transport, we're still doing it the same way.
Yes,
right. But that will definitely change with autonomous, right? Just considering that you can drive like in all hours of the day, for example, that changes everything.
You're not limited to the driving hours of the driver. Taking a rest, that is also for good reasons existing. And also, I think at the beginning I mentioned that it's not only on the production side, but also on the consumption side. And I think when you have autonomous driving, you can optimize how the cars are driving with each other. So you don't have any unnecessary braking, heavy accelerating, whatever. And that will save a lot of energy in the end. And that will also make it easier, right, to go a little further, maybe to the destination, charge less, and that's the impact that we have there, I think.
Yeah, and we can talk about when you have autonomous driving, it fundamentally changes the job market. And this is maybe another way of saying that it doesn't change so much. Just to have electric vehicles, we still have drivers. But the fundamental job market changes, of course, with the introduction of autonomous vehicles.
Yeah,
transport.
It does, right? But is it a big problem? Because we have a huge driver shortage today.
That's the point, right? People forget about it. People say this is a huge problem. And also, is that the same across the globe? We have a shortage of drivers everywhere or in some markets? I don't know that question.
I don't know either. I know that in Europe we have a big shortage of drivers, and especially now during the Russian conflict with Ukraine.
I think also that, every time, society adapts to what the supply is. And if we have suddenly abundance of ability to move around things in transport way, perhaps, society will also adapt to that, and then we'll, simply move a lot more, meaning that, if we still have people doing that or perhaps similar things, they will still have a lot more things to do. So I don't think the job market, it will disrupt, of course, and there's a traditional type of truck driving type of job, which is a huge part of American market at least, will have a big impact, and it will be hard for them. But the long-term effect, hopefully, will be still that more jobs are created potentially. I think, at least.
Yeah.
And it's nice to say, you said, when autonomous driving will happen. So you don't question that it will happen, or...
I think on the highways, it will become reality rather soon. For the matter of fact, my younger brother is a truck driver. So, but on the, let's say, short haul, let's say daily distribution, and there part of his job is also to unload the truck.
Right.
And that is not so, depending on the goods, not so easy to automate or to really make. I mean, there is all kind of obstacles in the way, and like small roads somewhere.
So then you have people at the endpoints instead, right?
But it's a very good point here. I mean, like we are really talking about this all the time: long haulage versus metropolitan or short distance transportation, and long haulage on very big highways, very standardized routes that are very repetitive, actually, even today, and even with very little deviations on where we are going. We're going from warehouse A to B, and that's all we are doing in this long haulage strategy. That is not. I don't think that's far away.
Exactly.
Oh. We were doing some sort of the 360 view around, solutions or things we need to work on in order to make all this work. Let me turn this inwards a little bit to our own companies. So we talked about the algorithms, the data, and all things that needs to happen. How do we need to change? And if I lean into this a little bit with my experiences from both Scania and Vattenfall, I think we're coming from two companies with a proud analog legacy, and we are used to driving efficiency in line operations, and we're used to running, projects and even IT as a support function and stuff like that. And here we are now talking more or less about quite software intensive type operations. And and what is the change here? I can spit out like from project thinking to product thinking. I can spit out DevOps, this is some major change, I think, in how we are organized and how we look at technology and software. Could we elaborate on that fundamental organizational and practices shift that kind of will be a part of this?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the things you mentioned are definitely kind of the shifts that are happening and really at all levels, right? So if you look at Scania, for example, there is really a shift into, if you talk about data and data management, for example, there is really a shift towards being more distributed, more domain driven in terms of how we serve data around the company, how we share it to each other. There is more ideas implemented around how we should apply DevOps to kind of developing our data products. But this is not only for corporate data, of course. The vehicles are data producers as well, and so this kind of applies to that realm as well. How do we organize to make data products kind of from inside the vehicles that can be streamed off them and served offboard to the rest of the company to make services for our customers or for supporting product development, for example. And I think this kind of, we talk about data mesh and all of that is happening primarily, I would say, from a more of a corporate data perspective first, at least. But definitely those same principles apply all the way down to getting data off the vehicle. Not seeing data as a kind of a byproduct, exactly. Because usually, if you look at how teams are organized in terms of onboard or embedded development on board the vehicle, right? It's a lot about kind of what functions they provide to the driver or to the to the customer, right? Which makes a lot of sense, I must say. But if you think about the data part, then data easily becomes a byproduct since their focus is something else, is providing a functionality to the driver, and data becomes a byproduct in that. So that's something we have to to shift a little bit. How can we kind of organize so that we can have an end-to-end responsibility for data, not only on board the vehicle, sending it between different control units, for doing, I'm not sure, for controlling functions aboard the vehicle, but also the end-to-end responsibility of bringing it off the vehicle and serving it to the company for different purposes. That's really a shift that also is happening, I would say.
But I have been working now with Scania since 2019.
Yeah,
I have really seen a path, and I think it's just accelerating and being more and more understood I think Scania already from 2019 and onward has been on some sort of platform infrastructure, product teams in IT serving infrastructure towards domain embedded data, microservices, data science teams. And we can talk about projects like Digital Dealer in sales and marketing, how the whole service operation, where literally this is hardcore technologists, and they are seen as part of connected services. So in Scania, I think this trajectory with the team topology, with platform-oriented technologists and engineers versus domain embedded, it started already in 1920, and I think it's just accelerating. And when I see now your team with electrification, that it's set up as a domain team is a no-brainer, like when that new unit was formed. Do you agree with this?
Yeah.
And I think this is kind of the software eating its way into Scania.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think electrification in that way is such an interesting area because it really affects a lot of parts of the companies when we kind of coordinate the data needs within electrification. It's not just us. We are like 4 or 5 teams, analytical teams that work within this area from different perspectives, product development, sales, connected services.
But can you speak a bit more about that? How do you organize to build a data product in some way? Can you describe a bit more how teams are organized, composed?
Yeah, exactly. No, so I would say that data teams are very much oriented around different domains within the company.
So please exemplify if you can.
Yeah, so us, for example, we're in the, I would say, the development of electrified vehicles domain in some sense, and this is kind of from a top of the company perspective, right? Because the company is so large, so there are kind of domains within domains. Yeah. Here somewhere, but I would say we're in the kind of the product development for electrified vehicles domain, right? But then you have, for example, the sales of electrified vehicles.
But if you go into a single one, so product development for electrified vehicles, how are you set up in terms of teams and their competences, etc.?
Yeah, exactly. So we're basically one team, but we're thinking that we're having a full stack approach, right? So we have
cross-disciplinary kind of
data scientists and data engineers sitting side by side to be able to take the full scope of delivering data and insight products, basically.
Do you have some kind of central team helping you in terms of how the data infrastructure is supposed to be set up?
There are kind of central enablement teams in some way, I would say, from different perspectives. Cloud is one of those. We don't have to
have a cloud team like that.
There's a kind of a cloud center of excellence, I would say.
Okay. But we can be sharp here. Like together we can do this dissection. So we have a domain team that you are heading up over there. Yeah. There was another domain team that I was heading up in finance, and then there is another one in connected services. Data from the truck, and there's a third one, another one, big one around digital dealer. Then you have in IT a couple of different platforms teams that running in the central IT setup. What are our platforms around cloud enablement, and how we build microservices. We have another one for APIs, API marketplace with Aditi. We have a third one with data mesh, data warehousing. And so forth. So here we have sort of, ideally we have a platform team setting sort of these services that we all should use. Now in reality, Scania is very decentralized. So this balance and this federalism, are we using the central platforms services, or are we coming up with our own? It's a mix.
It's a mix, but what I think now is really that technology is really helping us in this way. Yeah. Previously we kind of required single platform teams for kind of supporting this data infrastructure, right? To keep the whatever Hadoop or whatever system running. But that isn't needed anymore. We're on Snowflake. Right. So all of the teams they have their own Snowflake accounts. We manage that. It's not a problem. You only need like one person to manage the entire to the Snowflake,
But when it comes to data governance, then a bit more, and then you need to at least send data perhaps between the teams or between the products or between different, sales department and the product department or whatnot. Yep. Don't you need to have at least some kind of centralized standardization going on?
Yes and no, I would say. We need to agree on how we share data, of course. Otherwise, it will be pretty difficult to do it. But apart from that, I think data governance for me is so much around kind of organization and ways of working more than actually enforcing policies and stuff. I've been working with some great DevOps engineers through my years at Scania, and so that has really influenced me in the thinking. If we just kind of organize in the right way and have implement the DevOps thinking, a lot of the kind of the data issues will kind of be solved a little bit for free in that sense, instead of enforcing policies that people need to align to. But sure, we need to align on certain things on how we share data, for example.
But I guess you use Snowflake, you said, of course, and they provide basically they become like a platform team in itself, I guess.
Exactly.
And you buy it simply from them, so then you don't have to have your own in some sense. But still, there is some kind of, you need to have some competence around, how do you run some kind of data pipeline or whatnot? Are everyone developing their own way of doing that, or how is that?
Yeah, I would say I think that's the beautiful thing, because now most of the teams are using Snowflake, for example, and that kind of enables us to learn from each other in a really interesting way. So teams are in different phases. They are working on different types of projects, right? But when we are starting something that we haven't done before, what do? Yeah, we talk to the other teams and see if they have a pattern that we can reuse and start from there, right? And then we can kind of adapt that to our needs. So we have certain teams that have set down their pattern for MLOps, for example. They have tried a bunch of different things with this kind of foundation in Snowflake, for example, and come up with what they're doing it in a certain way. And why should we start by doing it doing something else, right? We start by copying what they did and talk to them and learn from them.
But I think one of the jobs that I was instigating and you took over was getting to what we call a commercial data board. So it's also a little bit like, on the one hand side is to on accountable quite high up that we agree on how we share data. But more importantly, I think that we haven't really nailed down yet is the fora or the community of the data product owners or the data domain owners, how they really are communicating in order to share on patterns and protocol standards and agreeing committees. And to be fair, I think Anders is pointing at one of Scania's Achilles heels. To get it working for within your context, I think we're fairly advanced. But then we come to some hardcore topics where data is needed for many different purposes, and it's not. We should be able to do it even better in terms of interoperability and reuse of data, I think.
Yeah,
but this is really hard.
Let me give a Spotify example then, just to make it very clear. I mean, I started working with something called a graph team. They basically they had data as a product. What they delivered was high quality metadata about music. Who are the artists, who are the names of the albums and songs and all the metadata around it and licensing and whatnot and deduplication and whatever. I mean, it was a large thing to simply build the product about having high quality metadata about music. That was used by a multitude of different teams that build their own products on top of this data product, right? If they were to have to build all the metadata and do the cleaning and the having the high type of quality around the data, that would be extreme waste of time, and it would never be really good. So do you have that kind of data as a product thinking, at least, that you have some kind of teams that are focusing on not perhaps delivering their product in terms of an end user, but rather the product of terms of the data that is consumed by another product team?
I would say we have that, but I would say most teams are more general in their nature, right? They are not only data product teams, but they support with analytics and insights in a much broader way. But there are certain teams that deliver data as products as their sole purpose, I would say. And as to take a concrete example, I would talk about positioning data, geospatial data, because it's really difficult to work with, because it's really large. And you need to have a lot of kind of knowledge on how it works in order to kind of be proficient with it. So what that team is doing is that they're aggregating that and kind of making it into another form. And that form is they're taking positioning data, making it to stops, Because stops is what we have discovered is it's quite interesting to learn about, not only when vehicles are driving, but also when they are standing still. But maybe most interesting, where they're standing still. And if you aggregate, then again, a lot of different stops from a lot of different vehicles, you get places, right? And once of a sudden you can start getting information about how many vehicles are stopping there, when are they stopping there, what time of day are they stopping there.
That's not that easy to figure out, how to
enrich
the data.
And I was part of kind of that team from the beginning when we started up that work. It was a research project we started like during my first few years at Scania. And that has now resulted in this maybe more mature data product that then multiple teams can use. But it's a multi-year journey to get to that position where you have these aggregated places where you can actually have some intelligence around those.
But I think Scania is on a couple of very interesting problems they're trying to solve right now. So in one way, we have had data products and all that. I think where the game is at right now, if I'm talking deeply with Thomas Dersjön, August, and the other guys, is like the next level now is to start agreeing upon the different domain teams. What are the sort of the meta layer that constitutes a data product that is interoperable and shareable? What are the core characteristics that allows us to put this in a data product marketplace? So so you can treat it more with an SLO, SLA, and you can safely consume someone else's data sets as part of your microservice or your data product. This is the next level game that we are at right now, that yes, we kind of have data product thinking for a while now, but the next level of can I trust it? Can I put your data product into my data product and run it in production
and really scale it, right?
And really scale it. I think so. We are we are talking about this now. It started with data mesh, but we are talking more about the computational governance and enforcing some standards in code that allows us to certify a data set to be used in a marketplace, like in microservice. Yeah. This is where I think the next step we are going for. Do you agree?
Yeah, I agree. And in order to, because I think that the kind of collaboration we have today especially around electrification is building us somewhat, at least, on that there are a certain number of individuals that have worked together in different forms, right? The company is large, but especially within data, I would say, especially
community,
especially within data at kind of the headquarters, it's quite a strong community, and that has really kind of driven this and kind of enabling what we do today.
But to scale it to the next level, there is a level of...
Exactly. We need something else.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Well, how is it?
Yeah, exactly. You mentioned the word force or enforcing something. I think that will not work, in my humble opinion. At least that's my experience in Vattenfall. Maybe we need to do a few steps back. And I want to quote our CEO here. And she once said roughly, I don't know, something like sustainability, which is, of course, our mission, is not an aspect of our business, but it is our business. And I think we need to have something similar for data. For example, I want to make it concrete again. Sustainability means for us also a lot less CO2, meaning that we're putting a price on a lot of the activities that we're doing. When you plan a business trip, you get the CO2 that you emit during that business trip, basically, in your travel portal to create awareness for the people. Oh, this is something I should take into account, that this is part of our business. On large scale, if we have hydro plants that use electricity from coal plants to pump up water and then basically greenwashing that electricity by letting it down again, how do we incorporate that in the let's say overall calculation? And if we have something, and that's why I'm saying we are not having that right now, we don't have a conscious feeling for the value of data in many ways, because we don't make it transparent. And also, where's the incentive to create a data product? It's a lot of headache, especially for people who are not data geeks like us. If you're a normal, ordinary business person, where's the incentive to support, why did I stop here? And put that into your data set in the end, or that angle of perspective into your data set to make sense out of it. So we need to have a lot of change also in the culture of a company, or in the awareness of all the people in the company, that data matters in the end. It is the same contributor to the success of the business as, for example, sustainability, which is already communicated all over the place in Vattenfall, at least. And that's, I think, a major factor that can make that happen. That little thing that we're missing is exactly that culture aspect of everybody contributes to that and understands the value of it.
I fully agree what you're saying, but I don't think it's enough, because culture and have a mindset, we can go out and bang that down in the heads of all the companies. But then if no one is putting money behind where the mouth is, if a P&L owner doesn't build up a domain team and hire Georg, it's all bullshit to me if I'm really rude, because we need to work with culture and mindset. But it starts with putting investments behind it, I think.
Absolutely. I mean, that's also part of what happens in the sustainability in that case, right? Like, for example, we are now encouraged to take the trains as often as possible. We are even allowed to take first-class trains when the distance is longer than 2 hours. So it goes hand in hand. Of course, you cannot just say, please behave or act different, and then not basically supporting that with funds in whatever way.
But in reality then, when it comes to the sustainability, and these topics, Vattenfall is clearly putting the investment where their mouth is. Yeah. Are they doing the same for data? That's a tough question, right? So that's what I'm trying to say. It's a cultural topic, but it's also
not as much as I wish, to be honest. But I'm biased, of course. But I would hope that at some point we would do more. That we would put. Maybe not more money, but sometimes it's even just little like acting.
But I think you're right. It's not you cannot police this or push this with enforce. That's the wrong word. So you need to excite. You need to build it up so it becomes little by little a natural core asset, right? And then when it's a core asset that it's part of how we optimize our business, we need to organize around that core asset. So if we think data is the new sun or energy, what is our operational standards and what is our thinking around investing in FTEs and all that? And I think here, it is a cultural mind shift, but I argue it's above all with the P&L owners in order to invest and balance their investments that these things matter.
That goes absolutely hand in hand, of course. Yeah. You can proclaim a goal and then do nothing for it. That doesn't work.
Yeah. So, sorry for being a little bit pushy, Sebastian, but okay. I think I truly believe it's a cultural mind shift, but you said it before, it's on all levels of the company,
exactly.
Right?
And if you want to shift, from data being a byproduct to data being a product, of course, that will require, investments, right? Yeah.
Can I also ask a tough question, and perhaps more directed to you, Georg?
Yeah.
And we have some people called like Elon Musk, etc., that are building a small company called Tesla, and they have their approach, and of course, to build the whole ecosystem around the car and the trucks and whatever they are building, and how the ecosystem of charging stations and insurances around it, and banking and everything connected to it. And they also have using AI a lot, of course, both in terms of full self-driving kind of approaches, not there yet, but at some point, but perhaps even more so when it comes to manufacturing and trying to find an extremely efficient way to manufacture a car in a cheap way. What are your thoughts if you compare Scania to Tesla in terms of the future of trucks?
That is a tough question. I would say that there is a lot of similarities, of course. I think Scania very much as Tesla is kind of building up an ecosystem or already having an ecosystem around our products, right? We have financing, we have services, we have, in different sorts. Then in terms of manufacturing and using kind of AI and analytics in there to kind of optimize that entire process, right? I think they have come pretty far from what I've seen from Tesla. So I think that we have some way to go in order to establish that. And I also, what I've seen from Tesla is that they seem at least to have a very unified approach to data in that way, that it's collected from all the places throughout kind of development, and it's available in a very good way in terms of when the vehicle's out there in the field, and they are very proficient in kind of turning that into actual actions, both in their development and in their production. So I think that seems like a very big strength. And I think there we have some way to go as a company, because we haven't worked like that before. Yeah. Kind of data haven't been the backbone in that sense, in terms of how we steer the entire kind of design, produce, deliver loop in that way.
What do you think the biggest strengths of Tesla is, and perhaps the biggest weaknesses that they have?
Yeah, I think their strength is in that way. Firstly, I think they have a totally different way of organizing and how they develop their products than what we do, right? What I've seen is that when you have a team, right, that develops, I'm not sure, whatever, the heat pump to the vehicle, they are not only developing it, and then some other department is purchasing it, and then they hand it over to production, and they are then kind of configuring the robots or whatever. That single team, and they're doing everything, right? They're purchasing the kind of the components, and they are programming the industrial robots that kind of put it together and in the car for production. I think that's a competitive advantage. So
take the responsibility for the full life cycle of that specific product, if you call it that.
Yeah, exactly. That's something that kind of makes them very adaptive.
And if we go into management theory, I think the Europe and the way our enterprises work has some sort of organizational ideology based on value chain and division of labor. So basically, we have organized in terms of different competences, and then Elon Musk is sort of running with ideology from software, where you organize around separation of concerns. So, so when we are saying domain thinking and domain teams, that is a separation of concerns. And then we have cross-functional teams around that separation of concerns. Whereas I think both Vattenfall and Scania and any other company with a proud analog history that been extremely successful in scaling up has scaled up across division of labor type philosophy. Yeah. And here, this is my sort of management literature spiel on this huge difference. Would you follow on that?
No, I agree. On the other hand, I think there's a big shift happening. I know what happens inside of Scania, right? And we are really kind of changing.
We're going here.
Yeah, we're going towards that, I would say.
It's a journey.
But it's a journey. We didn't start up that way, and that, I think that says it all. And then in terms of what you said around challenges and kind of what's their weakness and what's our strength, I think knowing kind of the transport industry, knowing our customers, I think that's a big strength. We have, these 130 years of understanding what our customers need. I think that's worth something. Then we can always battle, okay, what's best to be flexible and being able to iterate super fast. That's a big strength, right? But there is always something about having that experience as well.
But there's another key difference that I think is quite hard to understand. I think Daniel Ankilde was onto it when he was on the pod. I mean, it seems like Tesla is highly vertically integrated, and they are trying to understand almost building their own components in a different way. Whereas the European automotive cluster is you have an OEM and equipment who sort of sets the specs for what they need. And then in reality, the big car company is Bosch, if, as Daniel said, or, you're putting specs that something should be done in a certain way, and we should have it ready for this price point in 3 years. And that way of operating has served us well for 50, 100 years. But I'm not sure that no one knows where we're going. So to work in that way, how the European cluster works, I mean, I'm learning from Daniel here, listening to that pod. It's quite interesting, right? That here it seems like Tesla has a completely different understanding for suppliers or they don't see themselves as an OEM. It's much more vertically integrated from data to everything.
Yeah, exactly. On the other hand, if you look at Scania, for example, we have a very kind of proud heritage of really producing stuff ourselves, right? That's really something that that kind of colors the company, and also we have to think about kind of going forward, right? Because we are really good at creating certain types of, specifically around the kind of the internal systems and components inside the vehicles, right? But in this kind of new environment with electrification and everything, we really see that that's a strength, right? To be good at that, but we also have to be good in understanding when we shouldn't do stuff ourselves and when we should partner with others to really differentiate and kind of and leverage on others as well in a kind of mutual partnerships.
And how's that in Vattenfall? Because I think you are more and more really opening up to partnership and innovation and collaboration. And I see so much going on. This must be super important for you as well.
And maybe just briefly back to the vertical integration. I think it's very much a matter of maturity of the industry as well in that regard. So when we look at the wind turbine manufacturer Enercon, they were really doing their own semiconductors. Like I once visited their factory, and it was like really, they operate their own train to move parts. So that's how vertically they are integrated. Eventually, when the industry gets more mature, it doesn't scale so much because it gets so complex to control everything that you want to basically distribute the work again. And then in more mature industries, I think it's good to outsource, so to say, certain things that are commodity at some point. And maybe we see the same development in the electric car industry, that certain things become commodity and you don't need to be having your own little department, figuring out the perfect screw for something. So I think it's a matter of maturity of the industry.
And this is cyclical, because then you optimize in a mature market division of labor, and then you're pioneering electricity, and now we are back to vertical integration than wherever we are ending up.
Yeah.
Wow, time is flying, guys.
Yeah.
It's super interesting, and I wish I have a couple of more macro philosophical topics, but we are running quite late. Should we take one? Or I don't know, do you have a macro topic you want to end up on, or should I take one? Or should we?
Go for it, you take it on.
Okay, I think the macro topic here is circling back to almost the introductory topic where the CEO of Scania highlighted we need to do more and we need to do it faster. So, how much is also all of this boiling down to political will and regulations being in sync with what we are trying to do, that sort of that we need to lobby for or work on?
I mean, it's absolutely necessary that we are not only, as you said, have ambitions and say we need to act, but we actually need to act. We need to put the money where the mouth is and really move towards that, and that maybe is needing that sense of urgency at some point. So,
and this is not only from the companies, but
exactly, it's regulations, it's standardization, and I think there are many examples out there where it was sort of like initiated by some supranational, so to say, institution, or I don't know, it could also be super company, so to say, institution, that they just come together and talk to each other and act on that urgency that we have.
I think this is a good comment, and I think one of the main problems completely in line with that when it comes to energy, it's really hard to invest in energy and to the energy ecosystem when the political movements is flying back and forth. Should we have nuclear? Should we not have nuclear? So one of the main problems we have, someone said, there's no investment in this. Well, it has all to do with the stability in how you can plan and build business cases. So one of the problems we're having is that our politicians are not strong enough to go in one certain direction that goes beyond the mandate, a period, so to speak.
Exactly.
Do you agree with it? I think this is a real problem.
There was a very nice case, and Germany did again. The phase out of the external combustion engine. And one of our, wanted to debate it because of lobbyism. I don't know. But then, all of a sudden, the whole agreement is being discussed again. And then, of course, people and companies and countries and societies start questioning if they should develop in a certain direction if that is always being discussed, so to say. So that stability is absolutely necessary.
So one of the problems is volatility and not a clear... So,
exactly.
So they need to invest, yes, but more importantly, they need to stick to their guns. Is that a summary?
Yeah, I think so.
I think it's the same for electric vehicles.
Yeah, of course, it's still the same. You know, if companies are going to invest in this, of course, there needs to be a stability in terms of the political landscape, so we can make sure that those investments will play out, and also kind of the regulation side of this to make this happen. An example would be, for example, that drivers can count charging time as resting time, for example. Because the regulation now, I'm not exactly sure about the details, right? But it's important that they can count their charging as rest. Otherwise, it will be pretty difficult to make this happen.
I think let's stop there and let's together push our politicians for a stable, long-term outlook on how we do things and how we invest in AI and data and these ecosystems. And with that, I think I need to round off with our traditional ending questions that we love to ask, and that is sort of what's next in your life. I ask it to you first, your private, professionally. What's exciting that is sort of on the agenda for 2023? The rest now.
Yeah, there's a lot of interesting stuff, I guess. We're moving apartments, doing some renovation on the private side. I think that will take up both a lot of time and effort from both me and my wife's side. But otherwise,
so you're losing time in the Easter holidays for that. I am as well, unfortunately, which is really annoying. But
you're renovating on Easter, so you're not looking forward to Easter, Anders.
No. we haven't really started yet. We haven't. We just bought the apartment, so we haven't got access yet. But we'll get there. And then on the kind of the professional side of things, I'm really looking forward to kind of build the team now where we
you have some recruitment coming in right now.
We kind of doubled in size this Monday. And we still have some spots to fill. So kind of building the team is I'm really looking forward to.
That's cool. We doubled our team on Monday. That's good. That's cool. That's nice. What about you, Sebastian?
The moving in, I sorted out at the beginning of the year with moving in with my girlfriend. So that's
nice.
Check
that box. Love it. Any renovation left?
Some pictures to hang on the wall, but that usually takes time, as we know. No, I'm looking very much forward to summer. I'm a passionate sailor, so can't wait to get out.
Oh, you're the sailor, man. We need to talk about this.
Oh, okay, yeah, then we have...
In the after.
Yeah, and... Corona's over, so a lot of people in my age group, whatever, get married.
Oh, do you feel the pressure? Do you feel the pressure? Do we have a scope?
Other weddings are
that would be a new one. Schedule. Someone asked someone to get married on the AI after work. I would love to have that.
Yeah, maybe. But there's a lot of weddings coming up, and so it's a lot of traveling and seeing old good friends again after such a long time. So
oh my God.
Looking forward to this.
That's a great summer.
That's a great summer, exactly.
Yeah. Awesome. Thank you very much for a very insightful dissection of AI for electrification and transport ecosystem and electricity from many different angles. I really enjoyed it. Thank you very much.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, thanks for having us.